研討會。我係大會司儀，嚟自香港明愛嘅 Crystal。
大家好，我係 Steven， 亦都係嚟自香港明愛㗎。咁香港精神健康議會喺2012年成立去到而家，呢個研討會已經係我哋第2個重頭活動嚟㗎啦噃。喺上年5月9號，香港精神健康議會聯同平等機會委員會合辦過一個精神健康政策嘅研討會，而且仲發布咗全民精神健康政策意見書，作一個全民嘅諮詢添。
今日嘅下晝咧，我哋亦都會發表翻收集咗大家意見之後嘅結果嘅喎。講翻我哋議會舉辦今次研討會嘅目的咧，係希望同唔同嘅持份者同心協力，檢討同埋討論點樣去改善香港嘅精神健康政策，從而咧促進香港嘅市民嘅精神健康。
事實上咧，香港精神健康議會嘅成立目的，亦都係為咗促進有關當局去發展長遠而且貫徹嘅精神健康政策，亦都就人力同埋資源各方面係作出呢啲規劃，推廣精神健康嘅正向態度，促進社會嘅和諧，建設一個融和嘅社會嘅。
今日嘅活動咧，我哋會分上下午2個部分。上午咧會有4個專題演講同埋公開討論嘅環節。我哋邀請咗幾位重量級嘅海外嘉賓，包括來自澳洲對精神健康政策有深入研究嘅權威學者 Professor Alan Rosen。另外咧，亦都有一位同樣係來自澳洲，係國家精神健康公署嘅署任行政總裁 Miss Georgie Harman。
而且仲有喺嚟自澳門嘅精神健康委員會主席何志榮醫生，當然唔少得我哋喺香港精神健康議會嘅召集人陳仲謀醫生嘅分享啦。喺公開討論嗰方面呢，我哋好榮幸可以邀請到平等機會委員會政策及研究召集人香港城市大學謝永齡博士作為我哋嘅主持，以及香港精神健康議會嘅顧問香港中文大學榮譽臨床教授陳佳乃教授，仲有香港理工大學曾永康教授同香港大學謝樹基博士同大家一齊做一個專題嘅討論添。
而下午嘅環節咧，會有頭先提過嘅全民精神健康政策意見書嘅介紹，同埋咧由唔同嘅持份者同我哋一齊討論精神健康嘅政策嘅。下午翻嚟咧，再為大家做詳細嘅介紹。咁喺活動正式開始之前，我哋先請我哋香港精神健康議會嘅顧問陳佳乃教授為我哋致歡迎辭，有請陳教授。
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our honorary speakers this morning. First of all, our guest of honor, Mr. Nam Kong Sintang, GBS JP, who is the convener of the Executive Council, Hong Kong SAR Government. He is also the former chairman of the Equal Opportunities Commission. He will open the meeting and welcome everyone. There are 4 keynote speakers today. First, we have Professor Alan Rosen, Deputy Commissioner of Mental Health Commission, New South Wales, Australia. He will talk on the need and challenges to improve mental health policy. Second, we have Dr. Chen Tongmao, specialist in psychiatry and convener of the Hong Kong Mental Health Council and chairman of the Hong Kong Association for the Promotion of Mental Health. He will talk on the Hong Kong mental health services, present and future. Third, we have Ms. Georgia Harman, Deputy Chief Executive Officer, National Mental Health Commission, Australian Government. She will talk on the reflective experiences to operate the Mental Health Commission. Fourth, we have Dr. Ho Ji Wing, President, Mental Health Commission, Government of Hong Kong. He will talk on the reflection on the practice of Macau Mental Health Council. Last but not the least, we have in the open discussion later this morning, Dr. John Wing-Ling J. Wing-Ling Foxy, Convener, Policy and Research Committee, Equal Opportunities Commission, and Professor Hector Zhang, Associate Head, Department of Rehabilitation Services, Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and Dr. Samson J, Associate Professor, Department of Social Work and Social Administration, University of Hong Kong. And I'll give back the mic to the MC. Thank you.
多謝晒陳達佢嘅介紹。之後，我哋有請今日嘅主禮嘉賓，行政會議召集人林煥光 GBS 太平紳士為我哋致開幕詞。
Convener Dr. Chang, distinguished guests, friends, thank you for inviting me. Last century was an age of major technological advances. We landed on the moon as early as 1969. On the medical front, nearly all major communicable diseases are now under effective control. Even the deadly disease, cancer, is now increasingly cured. However, mental illness remains the least understood of all our diseases. Largely, it's because of the stigma effect, which makes many patients, including their family members, turn into a stage of self-denial, leaving their symptoms and illnesses untreated until it's too late. Unlike other diseases, we don't even have reliable statistics to know actually how many of us are suffering from mental health problems. Different countries use different criteria to define illness, and the more and say the more serious of mental disorders. Many common mental health problems, such as mood disorders, are not even counted in many countries' statistics. Even take us, for example, Hong Kong, supposedly a very sophisticated area where medical standard is very, very high. Annually, our statistics show that about 190,000 patients with varying degrees of mental health problems receive psychiatric services provided by our hospital authority. We don't have time for those who sought treatment in the private sector, although we believe that the bulk of them should have been treated in the public sector. A dedicated survey by our Census and Statistics Department, published in the year 2008, showed that there were about 87,000 persons with mental illness or mood disorder. Yet, a territory-wide survey commissioned by the government recently showed that about 1 in 7 of us here in Hong Kong suffer significant levels of neurotic symptoms. Now, 1 in 7 may sound over the top, but it should not be so. For example, it is estimated by the National Institute of Mental Health of the United States that an estimated 1 in 4 of adult Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental disorder in any given year. Given the average, much more hectic lifestyle here, our statistics thus seem to be on the conservative side. There are, of course, many reasons for most governments to put mental health issues under the too difficult category and drag our feet. But the issue is too significant and too widespread for us to continue to take a laid-back approach. The disruptions to family life, to human relations, to social harmony, and most importantly, to human dignity, make it deservingly a priority issue for us all. I am, of course, no expert in this, but my 3 years of experience as a former chairperson of the Equal Opportunities Commission has taught me that there are few principles which I suggest should form the anchor of any effective policy on this subject. First, I think it has to be firmly based on the concept of human rights. Mental illness is an equal opportunity disease. It cuts across age, class, occupation, and ethnicity. We are all vulnerable to it at one stage or another in our increasingly long lives. Mental health patients must not be cast as the odd patients out. They must be treated like any other patients in a humane, non-degrading way. Public education efforts, especially in stamping out the stigma effect, is therefore essential. Second, mental health problems are rarely caused by any single factor. They are the outcome of the complex interaction of social, economic, and psychological factors. A holistic approach is therefore called for. Clinical solution alone rarely goes to the root of the problem. Third, urbanization and complexity in the global economic order put increasing pressure on individuals. Preparing us to cope is much better than tackling the fallout after. Prevention is therefore much better than cure. That, of course, applies to all diseases, but the common phenomenon is that very few governments pay attention or enough attention to the preventive approach when it comes to mental health. For example, tackling acute income inequality, ensuring fair access to social services such as education, welfare, housing, and medical care, and upholding the principle of justice for all count as effective measures in the prevention of mental health problems by lowering social anxiety and common anger against inequality. Fourth, engaging the stakeholders, especially the patients and potential patients, including their families and their workplace partners, have proven to be highly effective in helping them to accept and face their mental health problems. Engagement is almost a prerequisite for these patients to accept and to sustain the necessary treatment. They are even more important in helping them to recover steadily. These engagement efforts have to be done at the community level to be effective. There are, I'm sure, many other ways and lessons that we can learn and share from each other and from other places with similar or more advanced experience in tackling mental health issues. That is why today's conference is important and to be welcomed. I would like to welcome the learned speakers from Australia, Professor Alan Rosen and Commissioner Harmon, and also Dr. Ho Chi Wei from our neighbor Macau as they are. A number of local experts will also be taking part. I look forward to a successful, sharing, and inspiring forum in the hours to come. Thank you very much.
多謝梁永光 TPO 太平公子。
Thank you, Professor Wilson. Please stand.
you, Ms. Harmon. Good day as well. Good day as well. 最後有請嚟自澳門嘅何志榮醫生上台接受我哋嘅紀念品。有請何醫生。
好，多謝何醫生。請幾位嘉賓繼續留步。我哋而家有請今日嘅主禮嘉賓，行政會議召集人林滿江 GBS 太平紳士，香港精神健康議會召集人陳仲謀醫生，以及呢一次齊心協力探索未來精神健康政策研討會嘅統籌，由秀慧女士同埋張建森先生到台上同咁多位嘉賓合照留念。
好，多謝晒咁多位，請各位嘉賓到台下就座。
好，咁我哋麻煩常務嘅同事可能要幫我哋轉一轉個台啦。咁咧喺轉台嘅時間咧，我哋都介紹下今日嘅即係開始活動正式開始啦。我哋會開始我哋上午嘅專題演講部分嘅。打頭陣嘅咧會係研究精神健康同埋政策嘅資深倡導者 Professor Alan Rosen， 佢咧會同我哋講解咧有關制定精神健康嘅政策嘅需要同埋挑戰嘅。Let me invite Professor Alan Rosen, who is an experienced mental health policy advocate, to give the first keynote speech on the needs and challenges to improve mental health policy. Let's give a big hand to welcome Professor Rosen.
Would you like to speak closer into this thing? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Delaney, distinguished experts in mental health, including experts by living experience, service users and families included, and other people who have given their time and commitment and volunteering for mental health. Thank you for inviting us, and in particular thank you to Dr. Chin Chong Mao and Mr. Stephen Chung for arranging for us to be here. I think we have much to learn from Hong Kong, particularly in the special mix in Hong Kong society of the ultra-modern and the most evidence-based and recent evidence placed into services, but also the upholding of cultural values. And putting those together, I think, would be a great way to advance mental health services, and it's something I think we are attempting to do through our mental health commissions, which Georgie and I will describe more later. I also want to say Chao Wu-Sun. I don't know if I pronounced that very well. Good morning and ni hao. This is Australia, based where it usually is in the world, but a lot of Australians have aspirations to be much more prominent, so that's why you can buy a map in Australia, which goes, it's not very well focused, but Australia on the top of the world. It doesn't happen very often. The historical context for Australian services is that there was a large impact of European colonisation, particularly on Aboriginal people who are the original owners of the land, and there was an invasion of Aboriginal lands and culture, and consequently there's been lots of displacement and dispossession from their lands, and of their children at the times in our developments, and we are still trying to repair that, and there are special mental health needs of that group, and I pay special homage to them. But the colonising culture in Australia, leading from 1788, had a very great male orientation, male predominance to start with. It had a lot of fear and isolation, but with particularly with the input of Irish and other people who were taking refuge in Australia, a rebellious spirit developed, and a frontier mentality, a feeling that you should be individualistic and be able to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Not so different to the Western frontier in the United States. I put up here one of the images of individualism and that rebellious spirit, Mad Max. This is a film series, a movie series that did well worldwide, that came out of Australia. In thinking of the films, I pay special homage to Sir Run Shaw, who I know a lot of people are breathing in this community. Mel Gibson was Mad Max, and he was the Australian equivalent of Jackie Chan action movies, but not nearly as funny. Not at all. I'll pass over some slides because of time, and so you have to forgive me some of this. We had our first national mental health strategy in the early 90s, and it is that time when a service user and carer and GP and general practice involvement was thought to be now central to the development of mental health services, and so engagement of service users and carers, as Mr. Lamb mentioned, became very central to our development. And we've had 20 years of strategies of mental health plans. Each of them have lasted 5 years, and the first one was the only one that worked really well, and we have lost some of the momentum since then, although we are trying to continue on these themes. The second thing was deinstitutionalisation, closing down institutions, which we partially did. We meant to do totally. We haven't done totally yet. And mainstreaming of services with general health care. Thirdly was increasing community awareness, challenging stigma with national programs on television, in the movie theatres, in the billboards, etc., and through having personal ambassadors in terms of consumers and family carers to present what it is like to have mental illness and to bring more people into the mainstream as part of the community if you've had a mental illness. The next thing was intersectorial partnerships between government and NGO organisations and widening the partnerships, and we have done that progressively. And then there was a national mental health case mix study, which was not continued, unfortunately, but we are now reviving our interest in that because case mix is becoming so important in the funding of all Australian services, including mental health. And we are also struggling on the basis of the very important lessons we learned during that national mental health case mix study to make sure that mental health is covered in an appropriate way. And that is not just for short episodes of care, but for funding for long-term episodes and all of life care if necessary. We also developed at that time crisis and continuity alternatives to hospital admissions, 7-day and night community-based care, crisis and family intervention teams, and home treatment and support. We also developed, in a patchy way, it's better in some states than others, assertive community treatment teams, where people who had severe and persistent mental illness could get very intensive care by having a 1 to 10 case management system, small caseloads, and having evidence-based content based on evidence-based fidelity criteria, and making sure that people had access to work, making sure that they got to their doctor's appointments, making sure they had help with their finances, their shopping, whatever they needed to get independent again and to stop the revolving door of admission of long-term people. And this is now a worldwide movement based on over 40 years of evidence. We developed residential alternatives to psychiatric hospital-based care, including secure extended care units for people that were based at general hospitals in some states, and some 24-hour supervised community care residentials in suburban streets, host family schemes, which have come and gone a bit because they tend not to be stable in our country as yet, but people are still working on them, and community residential respite with 24-hour support on a suburban street as an alternative to going to acute hospital. For some people, it is much more palatable to go to a low-key community home rather than go to a hospital. And they'll go there much more on a voluntary basis, and it's much more accessible to them. So those are now developing in some states more than others. This is one of the community residentials, a longer-term one for people with early intervention in psychosis. This brings us to the point about asylum. People talk about how asylum is a pejorative word, not a good word. But I like John Wing's definition, which says that you can have asylum anywhere. You can have asylum in the community. You can have asylum in one of those respite houses, as long as you have enough people to provide the caring and the healing, as well as the technical stuff, and also provide enough space for people to be able to wander around in. So if you have a house with quite a lot of land around it, but you have it in a community setting, this can be both a place of serenity and preparation and hope. And John Wing's definition says asylum is a haven in which to take refuge and a harbour from which to set out again. That second part is very important, a harbour from which to set out again. And I think this is important when we're trying to transfer our resources from psychiatric hospitals, and I know you still have 3 or 4 of them, but how to get people out and living in the community and becoming citizens again, and keeping the best of what we've learned in the hospitals, which is the issue of asylum and how to recreate asylum in the community. I'll pass over that because of time. So we're really trying to think about how our icons will no longer be big mental hospitals, but our icons of psychiatry will be ordinary living in ordinary homes and full citizenship in the community. And what it says down below is whether it is a Hutong in Beijing or an apartment in Hong Kong, you should be able to be entitled, and it's a human rights issue as well, to make sure that people are entitled to live in their own home in a stable way in the community as ordinary citizens with full citizenship rights. I won't go into some of the variants of the residential because of time. Just to mention also that when we're talking about service user rights, we should also be talking about family rights. And families are not an optional resource. And this says the family team is an essential resource for recovery. It's sort of like having, if you were a racing car driver, you would have a pit stop team. And in that pit stop, sometimes you need all your resources to come together quickly. And I think imagining your family like that support team, I think is very important so that people don't feel as though they're alienated or constrained by their families, but positively supported by them. The second National Mental Health Strategy concentrated on national mental health standards, and Jim Miller was very instrumental in doing that. Put up your hand, please. We will tell you a bit more about that. There was also awareness, promotion and prevention strategies were continued, and partnerships with the NGOs, particularly with Rotary, to run community education sessions, which will run through Rotary International in every locality in Australia. Early intervention strategies, which we'll come to, a national community prevalence study, door-to-door survey, and again, making sure that we now have national outcomes measurement with a national suite of measures. The community education program included a all-curriculum school program for all years of school, and they were complemented by undergraduate teaching and journalist training. And Georgie Harmon, who's here, presided over the development of a lot of this through the Commonwealth Government. This is the first version of the National Standards for Mental Health, and it's gone through a review since then, but when it was first produced in a very concise form, people started creating quilts to it, bridge magnets, festivals of the standards. Consumers and families really grew to having a set of standards which they agreed with, which they then take to service managers and say, why aren't you developing this? This then developed into a system of standards which became the basis for our accreditation in hospitals, in mainstream hospitals, general hospitals, right, and in communities right throughout Australia. And the major innovation for any standard system was to make sure that consumers were trained and employed as surveyors for these accreditation processes, and so were families. And now that is now standard in mental health to have consumer and family surveyors. And there are other parts of medicine and surgery that are interested in seeing how they can involve consumers, but they haven't got there yet. But with mental health, it's a well-oiled system. This is one of the measures. I happen to be involved with this measure that is part of the national suite, which is a functional measure. We also have a symptomatic measure, the HONOS, which you might be familiar with, or we also have a consumer measure, which is still argued about between the states. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. The third national mental health plan concentrated on some of these things. I won't go into the details. It had a safety and quality and accountability as principles, but it did not have any specific targets or machinery, which I think led indirectly to the mental health commissions. We had our second national mental health and wellbeing survey in 2007, and I'll come to that in a minute, and that under a Conservative federal government at the time, we developed some personal helpers and mentors, some support workers in the community funded directly from the federal government, whereas before most of our services had been funded only directly through the states. They also funded more fee-for-service psychologists and other allied professionals for high prevalence disorders equivalent to a system, the IAP system in the United Kingdom. This is a study we have recently completed which compares the treated prevalence, the untreated prevalence and the treated unprevalence. These are not grammatic terms. We more colloquially name them met need, unmet need and met unneed. And the met need, in other words, those people who need services because they have a diagnosable and treatable mental illness, those who get it, is usually hovering around a third. There's an argument from the psychologists. They think they have increased that proportion, but it is still contentious on the basis of the studies. It's still hovering just over a bit about a third. So we still have 2/3 of our population with a diagnosable mental illness who are not getting adequate treatment either for general practice or at the specialist level. And the issue about met unneed, people who get services who do not have a diagnosis, a lot of those people, although it's a small proportion, we have studied those recently, and most of those people are people who've had a brush with mental health before, have had treatment for a mental health condition before, but are now really just taking medication or some treatment or counselling on a prophylactic basis. Some people, though, there is a very small proportion of people where there doesn't seem to be a good reason for them having mental health services, and that needs further investigation, but it's a very small proportion. The fourth national plan, and we just left the era of that fourth national plan, there were no distinct strategic goals and targets, and it was never operationalised with an action plan, and I think it has been generally ignored. and it was superseded by our federal budget of 2011, which provided a lot of coordinators for services, but did not provide any enhancement of services because they were seen as a state responsibility. So basically we need to link up. If we're going to have coordinators, we also need to have people on the ground to coordinate, and that is coming through as a message loud and clear through the commissions. And then there was a 10-year roadmap which unfortunately had not developed any destinations, in other words, any specific goals and targets, but that's something that the National Commission is dealing with, and Georgie will tell you about that. So the next issue is about workforce upskilling and culture, and if we're going to have evidence-based modules of care, we need people to make sure that they adhere to the fidelity criteria, the criteria that make those teams work, whether they're crisis teams or respite teams or assertive community teams or family intervention teams. What encourages adherence to the fidelity manuals? Well, what I've got here is I was teaching in Berkeley, as I've been doing for the last 4 years, and I was waiting for a bus to go to the university campus, and these deer just crossed the road, and they happened to cross on the crosswalk. So I thought, now they're adhering to the manual, why can't I get my teams to adhere to the manual like these guys? So anyway, it leaves a question. So how can service providers help? We're talking about the workforce. By focusing on healing as well as on treating. The wording here says the heart, head and soul combination makes the big difference between just treating and our healing potential. And this is a service provider wearing her heart on her sleeve. One of the ways, in terms of a social movement, we have gathered people together over the last 24 years, I think it is the THEMES Conference, the Mental Health Service Conference of Australia and New Zealand. It meets twice yearly. It has all providers, consumers and carers, the stakeholders. It has the binational Mental Health Achievement and Media Awards for Australia and New Zealand, and is a crucible and forum for mental health reform movement. And about 12 years of advocacy occurred through showcase sessions in the THEMES Conference, resulted, I think, in part, was one of the reasons why we have a National Mental Health Commission in Australia and why we have some state mental health commissions. Because everybody told the Federal Minister for Mental Health they wanted a commission. And that message had spread. The next one of these conferences is a thematic conference. We always have a thematic conference early in the year in February, which is about trauma and the mental health workforce, which is widely unrecognised that mental health workers often get traumatised by proxy, or they bring their own trauma to their work, and maybe that's unrecognised. If you want details of that, please talk to Viv down in front. Viv, put up your hand again, please. Thank you. Wearing the red, so she'll give you more details or direct you to the website. Just Google THEMES, spelled like that, the Mental Health Service Conference. Just Google THEMES. Okay, so that led us to the mental health commissions, and we started publishing on the types of commissions there were in the world. And there seemed to be two types, roughly. There were two rough clusters. One was type 1, which was narrow, individual, and predominantly reactive. It had a priority of risk management. It was inspectorial, inquisitorial, or I don't know what the last word is there for. It was also tied to the Mental Health Act. The Type 2 Commission was much more wide in its scope. It looked not just at the individual problems or complaints, it was system-wide. It became positive, proactive, programmatic in terms of system reform and improvement. It looked at the whole system and it looked not just at the health system or mental health, but all of government. And it concentrated on transparent accountability monitoring, not only having a policy and a plan, but keeping government to that plan once it was declared. And some of our commissions have their own specific act or enabling legislation, and some have not. But that goes for some in other countries too. The Type 1 commissions tend to report to the Health Minister or the Attorney General. In the Type 2 commissions, they tend to report the Prime Minister or the First Minister and the Mental Health Minister at the same time, if they have a Mental Health Minister, and it can report to Parliament, and if you report to Parliament, you can't be slowed down in terms of being delayed by a minister or a government. It has to then be reported in Parliament, and then it has to be reported to the public. So it is a form of public reporting to report to Parliament. They also relate to all aspects of government. So the examples are Type 1 Commission. The earliest commission was Scotland in 1960, and then the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland had one, but they expanded it, finally made it part of a generic health commission, which means mental health goes down in the pecking order like we always do if we're swallowed up in the general commission. So the importance of having a separate mental health commission is vital. And Victoria, Australia is putting in a complaints commissioner as part of their new Mental Health Act, so actually they're Type 1. But the people who started the Type 2 commissions were the New Zealanders, and they were able to increase their mental health budget enormously. They also increased their funding to the NGOs from a very low base to 30% of the mental health budget now goes to NGOs. Canada followed that example. That helped us enormously because we kept getting told from our federal government that you can't have a national mental health commission in a federated context because we had too many state governments delivering health services and mental health services that were in the way. And then Canada came through with their provincial system, and that was just wonderful news to us. So we started getting commissions together, initially at the Themes Conference, and more latterly the National Mental Health Commission. We've been getting commissions together worldwide to swap notes and to see what we can do together to share the labour. So now we have Type 2 reforming commissions in New Zealand, although they've recently suffered a downgrade because of their big financial problems. Canada, Western Australia was our first commission. We thought our first one would be a national one. It actually ended up being a state one, and the National Commission came next. And now we also have mental health commissions in New South Wales and Queensland. So we have Type 2 commissions in 3 states and nationally, and the other jurisdictions are invited to join in as well when we have these joint meetings. So I've described that process. Canada, their process started in 2006, and they have a 10-year mandate, 2007 to 2017, and it came out of a report done by one of their senators, Mike Kirby, called Out of the Shadows at Last, and that led their Prime Minister to announce in 2006 the new National Mental Health Commission, and Mike Kirby was from the opposition. He said that Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who's still the Prime Minister in Canada, said, "This is the first time I have ever organised a standing ovation for the opposition." But obviously here it became tripartisan. As it has in Australia, it's in the policy of every major government party. And so we have some assurance, and we now face the reality with the change of government that the commission, the National Commission, will be preserved, and it's something similar happening in other states. Type 2 commissions have common roles and diverse tasks. They have similar goals, but they're opting for different ways of herding cats, and the most difficult cats to herd are clinical cats, let me tell you, and particularly fellow doctors. Type 2 mental health commissions, common roles, they set the mental health service system reform agenda, being blatantly aspirational but practical, identifying service gaps. They do advocacy for the mental health system reform. They do transparent accountability monitoring. They have regular consulting and amplifying the voices and concerns of all mental health service stakeholders to the highest level of government. This is important because people with mental health concerns, no matter how prevalent we are in the population, and no matter how many families are affected, it is very difficult to get those voices heard at high government level, and the commissions can become an important conduit and amplifier for that. They have to earn the trust of all the mental health service community. We'll come back to that. they are all of government and all of community if they're worth their salt, these type 2 commissions. They have to be fearlessly independent. The chair of the National Commission talks about being blatantly advocating, and they have to robustly differ from government from time to time and stand up for that, even though they're a government instrumentality in a way. So that's a difficult road to travel. George will tell us more about that. The aim is to walk together with government respectfully, independently and robustly engaged, and sometimes robustly differing from governments, but working together respectfully. Which is different in a sense to the consumer experience, the feeling that professionals speak for them. Feel free to speak my mind, says the consumer to the professional here. And just as consumers don't want professionals just speaking for them, we don't want just bureaucracy or government to speak for the whole mental health constituency, including providers. We want to have the voices heard of what is needed and what often gets neglected. So type 2 mental health commissions have diverse tasks, and I won't go into that because Georgia will give you a very good example of that. But if you're thinking about what outcomes we need from these commissions, and it's early days yet, including for the Canadian one, but what we are seeking and what New Zealand demonstrated you could get out of having a performing National Mental Health Commission, first of all, better resources. The outcome measure is have commissions been successful in attracting new funding into mental health. Better services, is there evidence to indicate that commissions drive improvement in service quality? Number 3, better accountability. Do commissions make it easier to decide which services really work and if the mental health of the community is improving? And lastly, better stakeholder engagement. Are commissions seen by consumers, carers, service providers and others as being trustworthy and effective advocates for mental health reform? So John Harvey Jones, former chair of ICI, stated, leadership is the priceless gift which you have to earn from the people you work with, and you have to constantly earn that right. You have to earn it every day. So in much the same way in mental health commissions, they have to earn trust. Building a good service, engagement and earning trust as a commission are like positive entropy. You have to keep working at it continuously to prevent negative entropy creeping in and taking over and chaos emerging. The main defence we have against chaos is to keep growing and building. And that's something which is hard to understand. We can't have a static success in a dynamic organism, and our communities and our societies are dynamic organisms. In Canada, they decided, because the Commission only has a 10-year mandate, that they would develop alongside it, somewhat separately, but alongside it, a social movement working separately. And they would, the social movement would be very inclusive of all the consumers and carers on the ground, but also people from businesses, the workforce, and from schools and universities, and trying to make sure that people were engaged in looking at community awareness of mental illness and what to do about it in their workplaces, in their training places, etc. And this is being developed as we speak. I won't go into that, but this is the importance of multimodal psycho-socio-cultural intervention was touched upon beautifully by Mr. Lamb, and I think this is really important, that we need to learn from traditional societies or societies like this that have married the ultra-modern with the traditional, that holistic care is really important. Now we know that most mental health disorders are multifactorial in origin, as you were saying. But why can't we then get it that most of the interventions we should do are also multifactorial? They're multifaceted, and we shouldn't just oversimplify our lives by only doing psychotherapy, only doing medication therapy. We need to look at the wider biopsycho, socio-cultural, ecological, the world, the universe and everything type sphere, and say we have to now operationalise that for individuals and their families. So every clinical thing we do also has a cultural dimension, and I haven't got time to go into that now, but if anyone's interested in this, we have looked at the cultural or anthropological dimensions for all the evidence-based interventions that we do. And we can talk about that separately. I won't go into that because of time. Social movements include the recovery movement, which has been consumer-led and has led us to think about services which are much more personal and which provide people with the prospect of hope instilling and of growth throughout life, no matter what stage of life they're in. And recovery is a journey, sometimes lifelong, and not an arrival, is the point here. If we're going to get these things done, we often need a social movement. And Marco Cavallo is the Trojan horse in Italy, which was the laundry horse in the institution, in the Gorizia psychiatric hospital, where the reform started in Italy. They've closed all the mental hospitals in Italy now. So Marco Cavallo, this horse who stands about 16 feet tall and is on wheels and can be taken places for campaigns, he was the laundry horse, because the joke was the only thing that got out of this institution was the laundry of the laundry horse. And so he became the symbol for the closing of the institutions. And it became a social movement, and we've recently seen this happen again around forensic institutions in Italy. We were there when this campaign was commenced, close the last 6 institutions in Italy, which are all forensic institutions, and to find adequate substitutes for it. And this horse has been brought out again to do this job, not alone, but with support from all the mental health professions who are involved, the unions, the training institutes of all the different disciplines, and a huge consumer family input into this movement. And they make a huge difference when you see how many citizens are involved. Citizens have a huge power if they invoke it, because it's a matter of dramatising to government how many people are involved, how many people's families are involved in this community. So there is a huge residual power there. And we need government and management to work together for recovery-oriented services. A recovery approach requires strong commitment from the top. It helps to work together. This walking together is very important. And finally, we can all be more effective if we're on the same page. And in this illustration, there is a recovering consumer, a recovering family, and a recovering psychiatrist, of whom I can hopefully count myself as one. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rosen. Please be seated. 接住落嚟係有請香港精神健康議會嘅召集人陳仲謀醫生為我哋做一個專題演講，題目係香港精神健康服務檢討現在，展望將來。有請陳醫生。
Miss Heaven Georgia, Professor Alan Rosen, 何志榮醫生，各位同業、各位朋友，咁就好開心，大家嚟到我哋香港精神健康議會組織呢個大型嘅研討會。我而家開始拉劇啦，因為我而家就講中文。而家咧就呢次係我哋第3次嘅大嘅活動，都有咁多朋友、好多同業參加。咁我今日嘅講題咧就係話，我哋睇睇而家檢討我哋而家現行嘅香港嘅精神科服務，同埋展望將來有冇辦法有咩特別進展。 嗱，我哋知道咧，其實咧就世界衛生組織咧喺2000年咧就已經話咗咧俾我哋聽，喺2020年咧，即係而家仲有6年到啦，就會去到2020咧，抑鬱症咧就會由當時嘅第2位跳到第1位，第4位跳到第2位。咁咧就你哋抑鬱症一樣嘅喎，都未計其他喎。咁所以好多其他嘅專家咧都估計咧，就話精神病或者精神科嘅問題咧，將會成為人類喺世界上嘅第1號殺手。即係越嚟越吸引。咁最近咧，內地呢個數據出咗啦，其實就話佢哋覺得精神問題咧已經係凌駕咗其他疾病之上係最多嘅。咁所以咧，呢個係真係唔忽視嘅問題。嗱，咁當時候咧，我哋話精神問題，我哋都唔好覺，除非有呢啲事啦。大家報紙見到一係就傷人，一係暴力，最凄涼就攬埋小朋友跌落街，咁大家會記一陣間啦，好快香港人好多人記得佢。咁呢個係一個我哋叫做即係好明顯帶俾大家聽，精神病可以帶到呢啲問題嘅喎，可以會死人冧樓嘅喎。咁但係問題就話我哋就見到呢啲，其實呢啲係冰山上嘅一角嚟嘅，最重要嘅並唔係呢啲。我哋睇一睇精神病，如果一個人好彩有精神病嘅時候咧，佢個生活係會點樣？咁呢個咧就係有我哋朋友澳洲嘅研究嚟嘅，攞咗Medical Bird 嘅研究。咁你睇到咧？我哋有一個叫做即係我哋生活，但係生活喺殘障、唔開心或者我哋做唔到嘢嘅時間計數。咁其實咧，精神病即係 neuropsychiatric disorder 13% 係最多嘅。即係所有病嚟講咧，我哋其實最 suffer。咁睇翻呢度啦，呢個最明顯啲啦精神病長屋住咧就話咧你唔死，不過咧你生活喺痛苦之中。淺藍色嗰啲你係死鬼咗啦，即係嗱你煙雷你撞車你咁死咗，咁你冇乜失法啦，死咗係嘛？咁精神病唔係喎，可以70-80年你唔死嘅喎。尤其而家好多小朋友一開波已經有自閉症或者有早期嘅精神分裂病或者思覺失調，可能佢70-80歲都唔死嘅。咁佢呢個生活裏邊呢70-80年點算？佢家人社會點算？其實咧佢哋付出咗好沉重嘅代價。大家睇下咁啊，講唔止啊！咁喺美國咧睇到咧就話喺抑鬱上嘅支出，你睇到就話喺我哋佢90年嘅時候，即係差唔多20幾年前咧，佢只不過係使咗即係430億啦，430億度啦。咁你睇到2003年咧已經去到500幾億啦，係咪話700幾億添700幾億啦。咁你睇到就話嗰個增長係好犀利，喺醫療啦。喺病人翻咗工啦，即係每一個對呢條翻生產唔到，有啲家人都睇住佢喎。譬如有個憂鬱病人想死，你屋企人都睇住佢，咁你一個人瞓住喺度，即係冇得出去。咁所以咧，佢造成嘅損失相當大。咁最後嗰度咧，佢哋講話全球嘅影響咧，佢哋估計喺2010年咧就係25,000億嘅美金喎，咁你乘7啦，7.8啦，香港知係幾多？好犀利。咁估計再多10零年咧，去到6萬億嘅美元。咁你所有又講金又講新聞，你又淒涼又蝕水，所以咧我哋一定咧要做得好啲先得。如果唔係咧，就真係即係個健康嗰個損失會好大。咁大家手頭上咧，好印咗一份咧，就係我哋高威水啦，我哋有個同事Margaret Chan 做咗世衞嘅總幹事。咁咧就早排即係過年之前咧，佢喺一個 conference 講咗一番大嘅説話，就係話精神科大家全世界都要留意啦。咁咧大家有喺手頭上，咁詳細唔講。不過就話佢整咗一個希望各個國家都能夠跟足嘅路線圖，幾時做到幾多個 percent， 做到幾多嘢。咁我哋香港引以佢為榮啦。我哋香港係咪做得到咧？其實我都好大話跟唔跟到？咁但係就大家去睇下。咁佢講得好重要一樣嘢，不過佢呢個都係同英國嗰本Lancet 一樣啦，教授都講過啦。No health without mental health， 即係如果你冇精神健康咧，就冇健康。咁好簡單啫，最多就有精神問題啊嘛。咁佢有啲神經健康啦，係嘛？咁所以咧 No health with mental health 就係英國即係拎出嚟好重要嘅 concept。好啦，咁咧就話，咁就我哋到醫生嘅驗證判下證，我哋而家香港咩問題咁樣。咁即係呢幾廿年嚟咧，就我哋發覺，其實香港而家嘅情況咧，就唔係話好好嘅，以我哋嘅即係經濟環境同我哋嘅精神科服務嚟講，係唔係好相比例咁我哋睇喺呢度啦。咁而家咧就我哋香港，我哋第2期 出咗啦。不過 anyway， 我哋第二期個報告未有，我諗阿 Eva 同麗華有冇啊？你知唔知啊？頭先阿林生你話791個啦，大概都係14.9% 嘅人咧係有香港人咧有一個嚴重啲嘅或者我哋嘅significant嘅情緒嘅問題。咁即係7%到啦，6%至7%到啦。咁就其實我諗真係唔止嘅，呢、這個一定係低估咗少少嘅。咁咧就大部分咧都係情緒問題啦，有6%係焦慮症啦，4% 係抑鬱症，咁2% 咧就多種情緒嘅問題。咁但係呢個我諗都係低估咗。好咁啊，辯證嘅時候咧，咁我哋香港有咁多問題，咁有咩嘅解決方法？咁你講咧，咩 mental service 啊，精神健康服務啦。咁我哋嘅服務咧，其實而家有我自己覺得喺上一次基本我講話3大不足，而家我當有4大不足，就多不足啦。嗱咁第一個不足係咩咧？咁就係話軟硬件咧嚴重不足嘅。咁我哋睇下點解軟硬件睇就好簡單。精神病咁啊，睇揾醫生醫先啦，暫時講下醫生醫。咁我哋香港幾多精神科醫生啊？而家咧我哋啱數過咧就不埋，即係攞埋大概280幾個 qualified 嘅 psychiatrist 即係教授退休都當係啦嚇，退休啲唔做嗰啲唔計㗎啦嗰啲。咁我哋嘅照顧咧大概係700幾萬人，咁我哋大概對咧就係1對300至300個啦，一個精神科醫生對。咁睇人哋嘅國家點啦？英國1對12000，咁我哋澳洲嘅朋友我哋用呢個最好㗎啦，1個對8000，即係話咧我哋精神科醫生咧一個人咧要多人4倍嘅工作量。咁呢個咧就即係可能我哋香港人特別勁嘅，1對4冇問題但係問題實在我諗知道政府有好多同事喺度係知味道，我哋都話要好啲做私家，好似今日咁樣應該開工睇病話，不如仲有去開會都可以話我出嚟一走一陣都得。但係你哋唔得喎，係咪先？咁你咪好凄涼嚇。咁咧就其實我世衞建議就冇佢哋咁高嘅，1對10000。咁但係我哋香港離開佢哋仲爭3倍幾喎。咁即係同埋咧，仲有一個好有趣嘅現象就係話，我哋嘅精神科醫學院院長林教授，林翠華教授，佢話我哋20年後都唔夠精神科醫生㗎，都好多達到唔到世衞嘅標準。咁我相信我哋咧，其實呢個係 urgent 嘅嘢係要諗㗎啦，即係如果你唔夠人點做啊？好，咁第二個不足係咩咧？就係話其實又係講金啦，講完生就講金。咁我哋香港咧，其實梁特首上任之前都同我哋開過一個會，佢都講過喺演講場大家聽過啦。佢話香港嘅 GDP 咧，就排行喺世界20名之內嘅。即係都幾有錢嘅香港人，咁但係問題就話我哋嘅精神服務咧，就遠遠唔係20名之內嘅，即係考試嘅成績同你嘅能力係唔同嘅。點解？即係唔知點解。咁我哋睇一睇就知啦。咁我哋香港用喺精神科嘅錢咧就係0.24 GDP， 英國0.58，咁我哋好多朋友知啊，佢好似係嗰個地球咧個 top 即係最叻嘅，咁啊0.88最高㗎啦。咁所以我哋睇到就話我哋同英國揸半，同澳洲嘅揸差唔多3倍幾、4倍咁滯。咁所以睇到咧就話我哋其實出現好多即係軟件同硬件錢嘅問題都不足嘅。咁咧就我哋中國人有一句説話話患不患寡，患不足。大家如果窮嘅咪有粥食，都有飯食飯咯。咁但係我哋唔止喎，我哋又患寡。又患不足兩樣，之餘咧仲患不均。點解不均咧？我哋醫管局有同事喺度知啊。我哋係精神科服務係 under 醫管局，咁咧大部分都係佢哋負責。咁但係我哋醫管局分七個聯網。7個聯網咧，我好多精神科收喺度，大家都清楚7個聯網嘅服務同完全一樣。比方講最簡單嘅例就係，如果我 refer 一個病人，即係我轉介個病人有個病需要養小病，去某一個聯網。佢可能行3個月就得睇啦，另一個聯網可能行1年嘅喎。咁我話大家睇翻香港身份證嘅大佬，點解我會有咁不同嘅待遇？香港又話澳洲話得咁多 state 大地方，我哋搭車跟住過界好容易嘅喎。所以我有啲病人咪博懵咯，你去揾個地址喺咩區，咪過去嗰度咯咁。即係冇講過我夾落嚟啦，你又快啲咯。咁呢個睇到我哋就係話，即係資源已經少啦，但係亦都分得唔均勻嘅。 嗱，講翻以前啲歷史啦，我哋都算老人家啦，將阿教授喺度啲大聲不夠，我都唔後生。我哋出嚟做嘅時候咧，係有 consulting charge 一個醫生連差全香港啊嘅服務。呢度唔夠，可以救火，呢度俾啲人過去，嗰度救啲過去。而家分咗7個堡壘，可以咁講，啲人係好難喐㗎。你一邊唔夠咧，嗰邊你唔會救你嘅，你自己搞掂。所以呢個好大嘅問題。咁而家梁智仁醫生上咗做醫管局主席啦，可能佢都會諗一諗，即係個聯網制度嘅問題。但係咧，其實咧，即係好慘嘅，根深蒂固嘅嘢咧，唔係咁容易。高醫生講過，其實都好凄涼呢樣嘢。咁希望大家努力啲諗一諗，你有冇辦法可以即係改下呢樣嘢啦？呢樣嘢嘅我哋有嘅，不過我哋分得唔同。少都好啦，都有得分勻啲啊，咁冇咁凄涼。好，第3就不準。咁梁醫生好好啊，佢其實咧即係佢嚟都做咗好多準備，講嗰啲嘅時候好到。我哋嘅治療咧，其實無論係西方同東方都係，即係中國都係啦。我哋中國人有個叫預防勝於治療。英國人咧就有，美國人喺外國咧有3個 treatment，就叫 primary treatment、secondary treatment、third treatment。primary treatment 就係 prevention， 就係預防，都係預防。咁但係我哋大部分嘅資源咧，而家咧係擺喺邊度咧？係治療。少部分咧就擺喺復康，好少部分咧就擺喺呢個 prevention。咁好高興咧，其實有個同學即係衛生署嘅同事嚟講，佢話佢哋而家都嚟或者你點唔係治療嘅時候啲病，我哋做教育啊嘛，咁啱啦，你哋喺度啱啦做多啲教育工作。咁其實咧精神病唔係冇得 prevent 㗎，即係好多人會話打預防針正喺度就打針就可以唔使 depression very 啦，但係其實好多研究發覺咧係好多行為，譬如運動例如社交活動曬多啲太陽都可以避免抑鬱㗎。咁呢個咧我哋要大眾要做多啲 prevention，即係喺第一層次已經可以 block 咗個病之後咧，其實咧我哋係最 cost effective，即係我哋個經濟損失係最少，同埋我哋人病人同個家屬嘅傷害最少，一病真係好凄涼。咁第4筆咧，咁其實咧就頭先梁生同埋Professor Alan Rosen 都講過，我哋香港嗰個治療嗰個 model， 即係我哋嘅模式係好傳統嘅醫學模式 ，medically oriented， 即係醫生主嘅，你有病醫俾藥你食 ，OK。咁但係咧就呢樣嘢有好有唔好啦。幾廿年前咧，精神病咧就真係唔係好清楚啊。所以唔係好多人之前睇醫生㗎，因為醫生唔照筆嘅嗰度，總之就你係幾粒藥啫，個風傳寫幾隻藥嘅啫，個時咁下咁唔知，咁所以唔係好多即係有志向嘅醫生會做精神科醫生，除咗我呢個傻佬之外但係而家呢幾十年就唔同喎，打後咧好多現在冇嘅研究，大家知道咧好多係好 medical 嘅已經遲咗 neuropsychiatry 係嘛？即係邊個位分泌多咗，邊個位分泌少咗，而家已經好清楚，啲藥都用得好好啊！因為有呢啲嘅研究啊嘛。咁但係咧問題就話，醫生醫病，就算你好似內科咁醫，精神病都有啲唔同嘅。佢要一個全面呢個，會影響家人，影響工作，會影響成個社會喎。你嘅心臟病，你如果影響家人啫，唔影響社會㗎，係咪先？你有乜嘢去做手術，都係影響你自己屋企人啫，係咪先？但係精神病唔係，精神病可以影響成個社會嘅。所以咧呢個係相當唔同嘅嘢。所以我哋都要頭先講Professor Rosen 講話一個 multifactorial 嘅，即係好多因素導致嘅疾病，我哋應該係用好多因素嘅治療去幫嘅。因為見招拆招咪要咁先得㗎嘛要。咁你如果唔係我淨係聽 model， 好似醫生講晒醫幾多藥，係咪解決問題咧？係嘛？房屋咧、住屋啦，或者經濟各方面嘅嘢咧，好多嘢要搞嘅喎。而家啲嚴重嘅精神病，佢真係做唔到嘢喎，咁佢都要住，有啲人要或者搞唔掂，都要揾錢咁所以都係有一個好大嘅問題。咁呢個就係我哋所謂不全面啦。咁咧就問題要解決咧，咁醫生斷咗症之後都想話個 treatment 啦，點樣方法咧？其實就相當困難。點樣解決呢個4不困局？咁就我哋唔能夠頭先講話，即係有人跳樓、有人殺嬰之類嘅嘢，我哋先去俾一啲錢去做一啲短期嘅嘢。咁就大家如果都記得頭先我講話元州30嘅時候，元州街嘅事件咧， 當年咧係我諗嗱，即係我入行咗30幾年，82年嗰時發生一件事，當時嘅政府咧就反應好快脆，佢點解條24小時嘅熱線，跟住咧就整咗個 PMU system， 大家識得如果做之行，即係我要優先覆診嘅嘢，啊仲請多咗醫生喺度做，呢個已經係我哋覺得係最大嘅轉變。但係 after 即係之後咧，我哋根本見唔到一個翻天覆地嘅轉變。有時你少少啦，嗰時阿曾生都講嗰時呢個投食斬到個，然之後都俾咗啲錢落去，我一億去咗邊？咁都幾耐嘅嘛話，咁啊開啲 centre 即係多綜合嗰啲中心，但係而家都開唔晒。咁所以我哋唔可以見招拆招㗎啦。而家我哋一定要比較即係睇高少少遠啲。咁所以咧就話點解今日即係山長水遠請咗澳洲兩位專家過嚟，就話他山之石可以攻玉。其實調翻轉，因為他山之玉可以攻城，唔係妄自菲薄。我哋的確嚟講喺精神科服務咧係遠落後，應該我哋可以有多啲。咁有人話喂，你個納稅都好低喎，香港10幾個%，你點攞 GDP 嚟計啊？你啲人澳洲納稅都俾得稅嘅喎。咁但係我哋唔好忘記，我哋好多儲備喎，即係我哋有錢嘅喎，你唔用嘅喎，即係等佢過過嚟啦，可能800個工場就好多錢嘅喎。咁呢個係咪一個好 gradual approach？所以我哋應該要點樣話咧？就應該要揾一個治標治本嘅，即係講啲高瞻遠矚啦，要睇晒成個。所以點解我哋會呢次係第一次呢啲第3次嘅會咧？我哋都唔會估係最後一次，應該會好多次。根據澳洲嗰7年嘅經驗咧，人哋要20年先開到個 medical commission， 咁我哋講都威啲都要10年嘅最快，如果肯嘅話咁但係得唔得咧？要大家一齊努力。嗱，咁我哋針對問題咧，根源問題啦，第一資源不足，我哋講咗啦，分文不均啦，焦點不準，咁同埋咧就話個面對嘅方法唔全面。咁我哋即係我自己個人咧覺得為一個呢個就係即係面對問題解決方法啦，唔夠資源俾啲資源咯，唔夠人就俾啲人才加啲咩啦加多啲設施啦，即係都係見招拆招。你有咩嘢做乜嘢？不過頭先講咗啦，20年都唔夠醫生，即係而家好多人做精神科，真係咁因為有時我哋冇人做啦，掟落去做㗎。而家啲人去20幾人咧揀7、8個，即係有啲精神科其實已經係比較優秀啲嘅學生，但係都請唔夠啦。咁我哋點夠人才咧？咁第二咧，我哋要面對現行個政策針對不均、不準、不全面嘅問題。咁呢個只係唯一一樣嘢，我覺得可以做到嘅就係他山之玉咧可以攻城，就係話我哋而家嘅精神科服務係 NHA 嘅，係一個好少部分嘅錢，唔係自主獨立。我哋唔可以話請幾多啲醫生，我唔可以要幾多嘅 psychologist， 我哋唔可以做。我哋應該效法譬如澳洲、加拿大、紐西蘭有一個獨立嘅 mental health commission。咁好多人話你唔好講咩精神健康保價，屋親你係死㗎啦，冇人肯幫你手啦。講嘅咁講公署都有，好似廉政公署嗰啲啦，公署啦 commission。咁呢個希望能夠咧就直接向或者衞生福利局長或者甚至政務司長負責，好似澳洲呢樣。咁我哋嘅精神健康服務咧，先有啲希望推進。呢個唔係我個人嘅講法，我哋香港精神健康議會其實簡單嘅 MHC， 其實都希望有個 MHC 係 Mental Health Commission， 我哋 council 傾下偈嘅啫。不過好彩嚟咧，我哋有4級啦，但係香港人都有2有。咩2有咧？一係有心，就大家咪嚟到呢度咯，有心嚟啦，係嘛？第二都叫有自知之明，大家都知道唔掂，所以咧我哋個 council 即係個議會開咧。大家一齊都歡迎各個環節，用家 service provider， 所有都知道係唔妥，所以我哋做咗呢個議會，去推動我哋嘅政策，推動我哋政府。咁政府都好嘅，其實政府其實都醫生都幫咗個 mental committee 㗎。咁我哋希望咧可以藉住民間嘅同埋即係政府裏邊大家互相合作，參多參就可以協調，可以將我哋嘅精神健康服務向前更推進一步。我講咗咁多啦，多謝各位。
界陳醫生嘅分享，咁希望咧我哋香港嗰個精神健康服務嘅政策嘅發展可以好似阿陳醫生咁講，一日千里啦。咁咧而家咧去到小休嘅時間，咁大會咧預備咗啲茶點咧係俾大家享用嘅，咁咧就要麻煩大家。
Harmon 同我哋分享一下喺澳洲成立精神健康公署嘅經驗。We have the honor to invite Ms. Georgie Harmon, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of National Mental Health Commission, Australian Government, to share with us the experience in operating the Mental Health Commission. Ms. Harmon, please.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to Hong Kong to speak to you today. I grew up in Singapore and I spent many days in Hong Kong when I was a child. So it's lovely to come back and see your beautiful place through adult eyes, which looks very different actually. So thank you. I also want to, and this is something my commission does at every single event that we hold. We honour and we acknowledge people and families who live every day with mental illness. So I would like in particular to acknowledge those people who are with us today, including those people who are volunteering and assisting us to have a very successful event today, who are living today with mental illness, and acknowledge the struggles that you've had and the fact that we stand on your shoulders. The fact that we are actually able to stand here today with a much stronger voice because of your efforts and because of your courage, so thank you. I want to start today by really just talking about setting the scene of the Australian context, tell you a little bit about our country and what the characteristics of our country that have led to the particular kind of mental health system that we have. Talk a little bit about my mental health commission, the Australian National Mental Health Commission. Talk to you about our approach, how we go about our work, what I believe has been our impact to date, and the critical success factors that have led us to that success. So we've just celebrated our second birthday as Australia's National Mental Health Commission. So we're relatively young. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about what we don't do and how we, in the context of how we go about our work. So in terms of what does Australia look like and how are we different? We've got a population of just over 23 million. That's ageing, but as I understand it, not ageing at the same rate as your population. The traditional owners of our land, the Aboriginal people, now make up just 2.5% of our whole population. We live in a very culturally diverse community. 25% of all Australians were born elsewhere, and I'm one of those Australians. I was born in the UK, and that's my homeland. More than 85% of us live in cities or in urban areas, but more than 85% of us, so given 85% of us live in cities or urban areas, if you look at the rest of Australia, on average there are just 2 people that live in every square kilometre of our vast island. So that obviously has some significant implications for how we plan, deliver and evaluate mental health services, and indeed how Australians access them. Now just some key data that I hope you'll find interesting. In a federated government system, we have many, many players, and roles and responsibilities are becoming increasingly blurred. The national Australian federal government has traditionally been responsible for whole of population prevention, early intervention and awareness programs, primary care, and also funding mental health services and medications under the Medicare benefit scheme and the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. Our 8 state and territory governments are responsible for crisis, acute, and community-based specialist mental health care. Thank you so much. I couldn't figure out how to do that. And the non-government sector is a very significant player in Australia, but we still think not as significant a player as it should be. There are burgeoning non-government organisations who often receive multiple funding from multiple governments to deliver very similar services to the same community. As a nation, we spend significant amounts of money on mental health. The national recurrent expenditure on all mental health related services in 2010-11 was almost 6.9 billion Australian dollars. But this expenditure actually just relates to specialist mental health services and health-related mental health services. An independent report by one of our largest health funds, private health funds, Medibank Private, last year, found that we conservatively spend more than $23 billion a year on mental health-related supports, when you include things like housing and employment support and things like that. And this investment is growing. Overall, expenditure on mental health related services increased from $248 Australian dollars for each Australian in 2006-7 to $309 per Australian, an average annual increase of 5.7% per year. In terms of prevalence, nearly half of the Australian population will have an experience of mental illness at some point over their lifetime. Right now, an estimated 7.3 million Australians aged between the age of 16 and 85 have a lived experience of a mental illness. 1 in 5 adults will have a difficulty in any year, and nearly 2/3 of people with anxiety or affective disorders have had their first episode by the age of 21. This affects families. On average, families and other carers of people with mental illness spend 104 hours a week caring for their loved one. For primary carers, that often means a move to part-time employment, or giving up work, or relying on their savings. We know that in Australia, mental illnesses are the leading cause of non-fatal disease burden. Of the total years of healthy life lost through illness and disease in Australia, 24% are lost through the effects of mental illness. People living with severe and persistent mental illness have their life expectancy cut by up to 32 years. This is simply unacceptable in a modern and civil society. But despite these startling figures and all of this money spent, less than half of Australians have experienced symptoms of mental illness in the past year consulted a health service. The proportion of people who are with a mental health problem who are not in the workforce is more than 1.5 times that of the general population. Almost 1 in 5 people who experienced a mental illness in the last year live in households in the lowest income bracket. But surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly actually, this is a very interesting point I think, even though people struggle in socioeconomic circumstances, their rates of volunteering match those of the general population. So people want to give. People want to give back, people want to participate, and people want something meaningful to do every day. In terms of cost to the economy, and this is a particularly compelling argument to governments, mental disorders are conservatively estimated to cost the Australian economy $20 billion annually in lost productivity and labour participation. And finally, in terms of suicide, on average 44 Australians die each week by suicide, far greater than those killed in motor vehicle accidents on our roads. And suicidal behaviour has been estimated to cost Australia $17.5 billion a year, which equates to approximately 1.3% of our GDP. I thought Dr. Chan's slide about GDP and funding for mental health was very interesting when you think about the cost benefits there and the actual impacts. And there's a very good economic argument for greater investment in mental health. Australia is known as the lucky country. I'm a lucky Australian. Our economy is the envy of the Western world. We have first-rate education and health systems. But somehow people living with mental illness and their families have been left behind. We have a mental health system that in many respects is absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But in many respects it's also a patchwork relic of our history and of the fact that we have many players involved and strategies that are again fantastic but have failed to be implemented properly. Divided responsibilities result in local communities receiving either duplicated services and supports or none at all. And despite growing investment in mental health and a number of new initiatives, the mental health of Australians has not improved. 4 national mental health surveys between 1995 and 2001 show no gains for the overall population, and for some groups, we've gone backwards. There's really well-established evidence of what works, and sometimes translating that into actual practice on the ground is problematic. We also spend a lot of money, as I described, and we collect a huge amount of data, but we still have no information really about whether that money is buying the services that have the greatest impact on the lives of people and families. And we also, even though we collect extraordinary amounts of data, we have no national performance indicators that truly allow us to measure every year performance in terms of outcomes of our system. So how we came to be, that's really the arguments for the establishment of my commission. Just a little bit of history here for you. We were established 2 years ago, on the 1st of January 2012. As is often the case, the commission was a long, slow burn. It didn't happen overnight. And if there's one message I can leave to you is keep pushing. Be resilient. Keep advocating for a commission, if that's what you believe your country needs. Many factors came together that just really couldn't be ignored anymore. Several national reviews and reports have been calling for decades for a different way of doing things. People like Alan Rosen have been calling for many years for an independent national body to hold the system to account. Mental health came onto the agenda of our national leaders, our Prime Minister and the Premiers of each of our state and territory governments in 2006, when there was several $7 billion invested in mental health over the next 5 years. But at the same time, and this is really critical, the community, the general public, was becoming increasingly interested and concerned. And in 2008, a global study conducted by the King's Fund in London found unlike many other developing countries, mental health was the third most important issue of concern to Australians after the economy and the environment. So that was quite unique. And I think there's also another factor. Professor Patrick McGorry, who's a psychiatrist, specialises in youth early intervention. He was appointed as Australian of the Year to 2010. And Australian of the Year is an honour that has traditionally been reserved for Australian sporting heroes. So to have a psychiatrist as Australian of the Year was absolutely seminal. And Pat did a fantastic job in terms of public and media advocacy, in terms of lifting the agenda for mental health. So I've got one slide to So in 2011, the national government invested $2.2 billion mental health reform package, and on the 1st of January we reformed 2 years ago. We now have a new Australian government that's just been elected, and the Commission has been asked to conduct a comprehensive review of existing mental health programs. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. These are my fellow commissioners. We're not the usual group of people. We're not the usual bureaucrats. We have a psychiatrist. We have at least one person who lives with significant mental illness. We have a family member. We have a member of an NGO who runs housing and aged care services. Our chair is a gentleman in the middle with a red tie, Professor Alan Fells. He's a carer of a daughter whose daughter lives with schizophrenia. But he's also a very well-regarded economist, and also used to head up our ACCC, which is the Australian Competition Commission. We also have an Aboriginal psychologist, an ex-health minister, a physician, and a businesswoman who's got a very strong interest in communications and the workplace. So who are we? We're funded by the Australian government, but we're fiercely independent. And we do have bipartisan, in fact, as Alan said, tripartisan support. Our three major national political parties in Australia all have mental health that features in their policy platforms. There are 10 commissioners, including the CEO, who bring different perspectives and different experience. And we have we're very small, with only 12 support staff. And I think that's been one of, even though that's a struggle, I think that has actually been a good thing, because it has enabled us to really focus on the things that we have to focus on, the big system changes, because we don't have the resources to do anything else. So at least in our early years, that has not necessarily been a disaster. We work across all sectors and all levels of government. And because we are so small, our business model is a partnership one. So I was really delighted to be invited to a conference that talks about working hand in hand. This is exactly how we work. We influence the work of others. What do? We report to government, but importantly, we report to the community as well. We see ourselves as a voice for people and a voice to the community. We have three main functions. We produce an annual report card on mental health and suicide prevention every year. We've just delivered our second one. We provide independent advice to government on where we're doing well as a country and where we need to do better. And as I said, we collaborate. We work with other commissions, other government agencies, non-government organisations, business groups, you name it, we do it if we think it's important, so that we can try and influence their work agenda. And quite frankly, we have a lot more money than we do, and a lot more staff and a lot more time. So we try and influence their work. The new government, as I mentioned before, has asked us to perform a new task, which is very exciting, to comprehensively review existing mental health programs in Australia. The government is particularly interested in identifying where gaps are, where barriers are, and to see if money is being spent effectively, efficiently, and for the best outcome for people. Specifically, the government wants to look at whether programs, services and supports are being delivered to those most in need, and to consider specific issues facing rural, regional and remote communities. This is a very important slide. It's what we don't do. We do not run services. We do not fund services. We don't make grants to people. We don't implement policy. We're not an apologist for the government, even though we're funded by them. We're not an apologist for the bureaucracy. I'm a bureaucrat. I don't apologise for myself. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We do not. The last thing we want to do is to duplicate the work of others. There's already some fantastic work going on out there. So many, many brilliant people doing excellent work. We want to work with them, alongside them, encourage them, support them, and not do what they're already doing. We also, despite the fact that we get calls every day from individuals living with mental illness and their families, often in very high levels of distress, wanting to know what to do, what can we do, how can we help, we actually don't have the resources to get involved in individual cases or individual advocacy. But what we are is an advocate for whole of system reform. Our structure allows us to sit across the whole system and look at the things that we think are the biggest drivers of change. This is Janet Ma, one of the inaugural National Mental Health Commissioners. Janet has lived with schizophrenia since the 1970s. She's been an advocate at the national level for about 30 years, and she's one of my most favourite human beings. She's an absolutely extraordinary woman. And what Janet says, and basically Janet was the brainchild behind one of the concepts that now drives everything we do, that people with mental health problems want the same things as everybody else. We've all seen up close the impact of mental illness on the material basics of life that many of us consider as fundamental, perhaps even as human rights, such as having somewhere safe to live, having a decent education, having a job or something meaningful to get us out of bed every day, and social connectedness. As a commission, we believe that you can't achieve effective investment without your starting point being the person with mental illness and those around her or him. It means we need to ask these kind of questions. How can you live a good life if you're living in poverty? If you're isolated and struggling to relearn social skills, despite wanting to work or do a satisfied volunteering or unpaid activity? How can you live a good life without a home? How can you live a good life if you're physically unwell and die young? How can you live a good life if you want to take your own? And so the Commission takes a deliberately broad and whole-of-life approach and adopts a very different model to drive reform than has traditionally been the case in Australia. It's about people and families and what they need to realise as much potential as possible. It's about what we value as a society, it's about rights, and it's about fairness. And this is our model of what we call a contributing life. The Commission believes that you don't achieve good mental health or prevent suicide by relying only on the health system. What we have is 5 domains that, if they're all present and working together well, gives everybody the opportunity to live a contributing life. Thriving, not just surviving. Effective support, care and treatment. Something meaningful to do, something to look forward to. Connections with family, friends, culture and community. And feeling safe, stable and secure. And we believe that if all of those 5 elements are present, we can do the best job we can preventing suicide as well. So, just 11 months after we opened our doors, our first report card was published. And we called it A Contributing Life. It was launched in November 2012. It really set a new narrative, even though the idea of a contributing life is not new. I think the way the Commission presented the concept seemed to grab people's attention and seems to have changed the way governments, the sector and people are thinking and talking about mental health in Australia. It goes far beyond the clinical and the medical model. In this first report card we laid out our big picture view, and you can read those 4 dot points on the slide, hopefully you can read them. And we made 10 very specific recommendations for action. Some of those recommendations were for the national government, some were for state and territory governments, some were for the community and the non-government sector, and some indeed were for us as a Commission. Exactly 12 months later, just a number of weeks ago actually, we released our second report card. And in this report card we actually reported back on progress from 2012. And we also made a further 8 recommendations for action. And both of these reports are available on our website, which I'll show you later. Organisations like mine must only exist if they're useful and have an impact. The contributing life narrative and how it changes thinking about mental health, and the 2 report cards we've produced so far are starting to have an impact at the national level. The new task we've been given by the newly elected government to review mental health programs and provide the government with recommendations indicates that we are seen as both useful and credible. While I believe this review will be our most important work to date, I wanted to spend a few minutes telling you about what I see as the other highlights of our success in the first 2 years. Alan talked a little bit about engagement and trust, and I think this is probably one of the areas where we work the hardest. We spent a long time and many, many months reaching out to people, travelling around the country, talking to people, from clinicians to families to consumers, to universities, to schools, to teachers, to policemen, to everybody, to find out what their issues were and to really see what role they thought we as a National Commission could play. In terms of making the voice heard, the voice of consumers and families that Alan talked about that isn't heard that often or needs to shout to be heard. We've done a lot of work to try and make that voice heard, so the voices of people with lived experience. We've worked to eliminate the use of seclusion and restraint of people in mental health services. And since 2005, Australia has had a national commitment to reduce and, where possible, to eliminate the use of seclusion and restraint. And yet, we have no idea about what has changed. So in our first report card, we pushed really hard. We made a recommendation, and one of our most pleasing results has been that for the first time in Australia, national seclusion rates have been made publicly available. And in fact, the second lot of national figures have just been released as well. So that's one example of where I think as a Commission, we have improved accountability, and governments are starting to listen to the reasons to be more transparent to the community and to their constituents about the performance of the system. We also called for the governments to sign up to national targets and indicators to measure our performance. And we were delighted that a few weeks after our first report card was issued, all Australian governments welcomed that report card and committed to develop national indicators and targets. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while, but that was a significant change that I think we've had something to do with. And importantly, we've forged relationships both within our own country but also internationally As Alan said, we've been working with commissions around the globe. And we pulled together the first, what we believe was the first meeting of international commissions in Sydney in early 2013, where we signed the Sydney Declaration, which again is available on our website. And that's really a declaration of those commissions globally working hand in hand on a number of very key issues that affect all of our nations. And then I just really want to focus on a couple of 4 slides that really just focus on the things that I think have been really, really important to our success. Strong leadership is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. You need people, not only in high-profile positions like commissioners, but people in other organisations who believe in your cause and who can stand shoulder to shoulder with you and talk the same language and push the same issues and agendas, and get into government and get into decision makers in different ways. So strong leadership is absolutely essential. And I think our Commission has actually shown very, very strong national leadership. It has caused some distress for us at times, where we have been at odds with our funder, and we've been highly critical of government, but I think that is our goal. Our independence is absolutely essential. We need to be allowed to be fiercely independent, to tell it how it is. Especially because, and this is something that's actually probably quite unique to us in the Type 2 Commission. We do not have any enabling legislation, nor do we have any legislative powers. We trade on influence. We trade on facts. We trade on the immutable fact that if we don't do something to tackle the mental health problems in Australia, we might as well all go home. So we trade on influence. We have no legislative or regulatory power, and so that independence becomes even more important to us. The fact that we're a constant presence, the fact that we report back year on year on year about what's changed and what hasn't improved, I think has been very important. The fact that we focus on people and families and outcomes, not activities, not the number of bed days, not the number of readmissions within 28 days, which are very important indicators of a system. But we focus on whether or not people are living good lives. We focus on whether people are getting jobs and keeping jobs. And those are the things that we think are very important. Here's an example of our independence. So in 2012 we made 10 recommendations, and in 2013 we reported back again. I'll give you a couple of examples now. We in 2012 said we need to increase access from 6 to 8% to 12% of the population, access to mental health services. We had a very, very good look nationally to see what had changed in that year, and we basically said it's not good enough. We were very, very disappointed. We could see no evidence of any national leadership by our governments on this issue. In terms of the use of seclusion and restraint, we were heartened by the fact that state and territory governments had released their data for the first time and openly reported on their performance to the public. But we were also disappointed that we remained distant from our target to eliminate the use of seclusion and restraint. Another example, a very big focus of the Commission has been physical health and life expectancy. And we said governments need to set a target. The fact that people with mental health problems living with severe mental illness can die up to 32 years earlier than the rest of us is just not acceptable. So we need to set some targets to improve that. And this is an example of where we saw good progress and we saw things happening, we congratulated and we applauded it. So we said we're encouraged by government's commitment to develop national targets and indicators of mental health reform. But then we said, because we need to keep the pressure up, we're disappointed that while targets and indicators have actually been developed, and they have in the last 12 months, that they have been developed and they have been given to government to consider. There is no fit by governments yet to adopt them. So again, these are examples of how we as a Commission can sit over the system and provide independent advice and hold people to account. The second success factor to me are being relevant, not over-promising, and picking issues that will drive the biggest system changes. You need to be ambitious, you can't be timid, got to be bold. You've also got to understand your own constraints, not only in terms of resources, but also in terms of, whether or not if you tread too quickly into one territory, it could have a perverse incentive, or it could upset so many people that they never want to see you again. So some worlds you need to enter into more gently. You need to have a really clear idea of your priorities and make that public. One of the things that as a Commission we have done is to make all of our public policies very much publicly available on our website. So all of our key documents, our key pieces of advice to government are publicly available. And it's our work plan. We make reform everyone's business. This is not about them. It's not about them, it's about us. It's about all of us. And mental health needs to be everyone's business. And we've also focused on the things that we think have the potential, at least in our early years, to focus on the biggest transformation of change for people's lives. And those are physical health, attacking stigma and discrimination. We don't just talk about, as a Commission, we don't just talk about stigma, we talk about discrimination as well. We focused on seclusion and restraint. We focused on the employment opportunities for people. We also have made mental health very squarely one of the solutions to a strong economy. And that is a very important role that we've played. It's the last dot point that I really wanted to focus on, the next slide, the development of national performance indicators and targets. So this was a job given to us to lead. We came up with a 10-year vision, and basically what we've said is if we do things right over the next 10 years, we should have a reduced prevalence of mental illness. We should have an increased understanding of mental illness and change behaviour and better attitudes by people, and less stigma and less discrimination. And we should have increased funding allocated to and spent on mental health, especially community mental health services and supports that reflect the burden of disease. So those down the left-hand side of the screen are our 10-year goals and targets at a population level. And then there are 6 domains which map very, very broadly to the contributing life domains of the Commission, which was very encouraging for us, which really just lead up to those population targets. And I'll give you a couple of deep dives into it. So we thought, let's set a national target to improve life expectancy and improve people's physical health. So what we said is we can measure that, we can have an indicator now about life expectancy of adults, achieving parity with that of the rest of the population over 10 years. And we can do that by focusing on things like reducing smoking rates and increasing the proportion of adults over 18 with a disclosed mental illness. We're screened every 12 months for physical health and dental health as well. So that the person is treated as a whole person, their mental illness does not overshadow their physical health problems, which is so often the case. Here's another example, the target of more people having good mental health and well-being. It's a population well-being measure. We'd like to increase the proportion of the population who report positive emotional well-being. We've got a couple of indicators here. The first one, increasing the proportion of consumers and carers in safe, affordable, appropriate and stable accommodation that meets their mental health needs. And the fourth indicator there being reducing the number of adolescents, so 16 to 25-year-olds, not in employment, education and training. And that's an OECD measure, so that's a measure that we would actually be able to track globally if the government adopted it as one of our national measures. So there's a couple of examples of the role the Commission has played in terms of trying to increase accountability and measure what we treasure. Not measure activity, measure what we treasure. The third critical success factor, relationships. Relationships, relationships. The first thing we did as a Commission was to build relationships. Internationally, within our own country, people down the street. People with lived experience so people living with mental illness and their families. At our first Commission meeting, the Commission decided that those people would drive everything that we do. Not medical systems, people. And that everything we needed to do needed to be measured against that. We needed to influence the actions, advocacy and behaviour of others, and not just the usual suspects. So we've got a very strong partnership for example, with the Business Council of Australia, which is the peak body for major corporations in Australia. We need to amplify the Commission's efforts through very, very strong partnerships with state mental health commissions, with Alan's Commission, we're in the process of developing a memorandum of understanding, but also with other agencies like Health Workforce Australia. We work inside the tent. Whilst we hold government to account, we need to do that in a respectful way. And my view is that you do that much more effectively if you're inside the tent than if you're outside throwing rocks. So that's something for you to think about in terms of your advocacy around the Commission and the government structure that you're advocating for. And then international links. I mean, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We learned from the experiences of other countries. We made very, very strong friendships with Canada who were extraordinarily helpful for us in our first 6 months, telling us what the mistakes that they've made and the things to look out for, and the things that they felt, 5 years on had made the biggest difference. So building those global relationships and making international friends has been very, very important to us. Here's an example of a very strong alliance with, again, not the usual suspects. I talked earlier about the fact that people with mental illness living in Australia are far less likely to be part of the workforce. We formed a mentally healthy workplace alliance. We're one of the founding members. The other founding members are the peak business groups in Australia, so the Business Council of Australia, the Council of Small Businesses, which is small business is the largest employer of Australians. And also the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We've got government regulatory bodies, we've got Safe Work Australia, we've got some major national NGOs like Beyond Blue and the Mental Health Council of Australia. And we've done a lot in Australia to try and influence employers and influencing employers to have good practice in the workplace in terms of retaining but also attracting people with mental health problems. That hasn't worked terribly well. Our employment and participation rates have not improved. So what we decided very early on was that we needed to go about this a different way, and this needed to be owned by business and driven by business, not by us wagging our finger at employers saying, this is what you must do, but in fact going to business and saying, how can we help? Tell us about your environments, and let's work together to come up with some solutions that then you can take back to your individual unique workplaces and implement. And to be frank, business have said to us that that's the only reason they're at the table. They will stay at the table if we continue to approach this in a partnership model. And we use those business peaks for them to influence their membership in terms of introducing better policies and practices in the workplaces. The last critical success factor is genuine participation and engagement. Listening, not just talking. Not being bureaucratic. Being agile, being able to move and adapt. And our size has actually helped perversely in that. We've been very active in our engagements. We meet with people on a regular basis. Every time we go to a community, we have a community meeting that anyone can come to and meet the commissioners and ask questions. And importantly, we ask people and families what works. What works for them. Because as I said, it's not about them, it's about all of us. And that's something that we've learned. Every family has a story to share. Sorry, I should have acknowledged a very distinguished gentleman. Now, here's a group of Aboriginal men from this very small community of Santa Teresa, which is about 2 hours drive outside of Alice Springs, which is right in the centre of Australia. Some of them in traditional garb. We visited the Santa Teresa community last year, and this is what they told us. And again, I think the fact that there's this tiny Aboriginal community in the middle of nowhere saying exactly the same things to us as major urban populations in Sydney and in Melbourne and in all these very modern cities. They said to us, listen to us, include us in the decisions that affect us, and support us to develop the models that will actually help our communities. So it's about empowerment. It's about listening to people and saying, what are your circumstances and what would make the biggest difference in your community? So here we are in the middle of nowhere, and this is what this group is telling us. And we've really kind of taken this to heart and fed it into a thing we do. And here's an example of how we've done this. There is no national data anywhere in Australia that allows us to routinely collect from people with lived experience, from their carers and families, how they are doing, what is working for them, and to have that voice hardwired into the data that policymakers and decision makers and funders actually listen to. So we started a project called the National Contributing Life Project, and we piloted it in the last year, and basically it's a series of focus groups, community conversations, an online survey, face-to-face interviewing, to really ask people what are the things that help you to live a contributing life, or a good life, a fulfilling life, and what are the things that get in the way of that life, of living a good life. And the three most important things that have emerged from that pilot study are nothing to do with the mental health system, and nothing to do with the health system. They're relationships and connectedness, feeling part of a community, ending stigma and discrimination, and a sense of personal control and empowerment, including financial security. So if people are saying to us, these are the things that will drive the biggest changes and make the biggest improvements in our lives, then maybe we need a mental health system that actually takes account of these things. Success is not a straight line. It's very wiggly, as far as I can see. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Our journey is far from over. And success, as I said, never takes a straight line. But I believe that the establishment of the Commission marked a major shift in the view of mental health and suicide prevention in Australia. We have a lot more work to do. Later this year we will present to the National Government our findings in the review of mental health programs. We're optimistic that we can make a difference. And we can only make a difference through our independent, evidence-informed advice and reports, by influencing a number of levers for change, through strong national leadership, driving consensus and focus on the things that will drive the biggest differences, by working hand in hand with a number of partners, and by always remembering that we will be judged by the people whose lives we work to improve, not systems and not services. We've got a large task indeed, with great potential, I think, to change our whole society for the better. Here's our website. You can find all the documents that I've referred to on this website. Thank you again for inviting me to Hong Kong and for your hospitality. The Australian Mental Health Commission stands ready to be your friend and to help you as you move into continue your advocacy and lobbying efforts. I hope this has given you food for thought, and I'd just like to give the last word to actually not me, to some other people. So thank you.
One key issue is that every few years, mental health rises to the surface and receives attention from governments. But it then is not dropped or discarded, but it gets displaced by other higher priorities. I feel that is a problem for mental health right now. My fellow commissioners and I have had vigorous conversations about how best to to report back on these issues. In the end, we decided that our credibility and usefulness to the community relies on us telling it as it is. Our work has shown that there is a cycle of vulnerability that crosses generations, and vulnerability and mental health are intricately weaved together. Our current system is not designed with the needs of people and families at their core. And these, as I've said, are needs that are far wider than just health services.
The essence of what we're saying is there should be no wrong door, because in our systems, our hospitals and our health services, we're becoming so specialised that when you get the double whammy, the triple whammy, we don't want to see you. You get to the bottom of the queue. We should be emphasising better integration across those systems, no wrong door, and giving a much greater boost to what Alan was speaking about, which is care right out there in the community, where people don't get divided up into little bits and pieces. The federal government is particularly proud of the work that the Commission is doing. We're very pleased to accept the report today. We know it comes with a heavy burden, and I hope that with your support and with the support of the Commission, ultimately we may be able to deliver better outcomes in the 21st century that our country should be achieving.
I think the main thing from this year's report card is the fact that we're starting to see governments and others responsible for acting in the mental health space held accountable. We had recommendations 12 months ago, and we see in this report card that progress has just been too slow on too many fronts. And that largely comes down to the Australian government and state and territory governments sitting down together to really make progress on these important issues.
Importantly, at the end of 2013, we have a new national government. So today's report card is extremely important. It engages the new government, and specifically it says to the new government, we need support. It says to the wider community, there is still a lot of work to do. Last year's report set an agenda. This year's report says, now let's get on with the work.
What I want you to know is that you can make a difference to someone's life. You can say hello. You can make them feel welcome in your community, and it doesn't have to be something really, really special.
Thank you, Ms. Harman, for your inspiring speech and also the video. 好啦，咁多位聽完澳洲嘅經驗咧，我哋又翻近啲嘅澳。
精神衞生委員會咧，澳門嘅精神衞生委員會咧，比澳洲早咗成立，係喺2005年已經成立啦。咁點解咧？因為喺1999年嘅時候，我哋回歸前咧，我哋已經頒布咗一條法令，就係31/99/M， 類似咧就係講mental health law 咁樣呢條法令裏面咧，我哋已經加入咗咧，要成立呢個精神衞生委員會。但係大家睇到啦，呢條法令咧係1999年頒布嘅，但係咧精神衞生委員會咧係喺2005年先至成立。咁點樣解讀？大家睇一睇。所以冇政策唔會有呢個委員會成立。有咗呢個法令，咁隨住需要上面，最終有2005年成立。咁我唔會逐條到啦，大家我相信大家都有個 handout 喺手上。咁我慳翻啲時間catch up 翻個 high schedule。咁其實佢所規範咗精神衞生委員會咧，好清晰嘅職權，包括啲乜嘢？由對一啲硬件到政策到服務嘅呢個網上都有㗎啦，都包含。咁我哋睇翻咧，
響我哋一路嘅工作裏面咧，我哋睇到就係會同好似頭先澳洲嘅經驗一樣，其實我哋係已經唔係淨係單純去睇一個medical care， 反而係點樣一個 wellness 嗰個方面進展。咁所以你睇到啦，我哋響同民間或者係政府或者係其他嘅志願團體裏面，我哋進行咗好多不同嘅工作。咁咧我想同大家分享一個咧，就係話我哋喺澳門裏面咧，我哋響應該係世界衞生組織第一次講關於 mental health 嘅出咗第一份報告，佢就俾咗我哋澳門一個10大行動，唔係俾澳門啦，俾全球一個10大行動建議。咁我哋就攞住呢個藍本咧，去響過去我哋成立咗之後咧，我哋睇住呢個藍本咧，去根據呢10大行動建議咧，就喺澳門裏面咧去開展呢方面嘅工作。咁睇翻咧，喺2008年嘅時候咧，安卡咧有同世界衞生組織一齊咧發表咗一個報告，就係有關點樣可以喺社區裏面推展精神健康嘅服務，唔係淨係一個診治嘅服務，即係包括點樣可以令到可以提升一個人嘅健康滿足感。咁所以咧，我哋咧就開展咗咧，就呢個4級所謂嘅4級嘅聯網服務，就唔係話淨係睇由一個治療上，而係推動到一個關注下健康嘅人員。然之後咧，我哋再由我哋嘅政府部門同民間嘅團體合作，無論係技術或者係資源上面嘅支持，而民間機構嗰個嘅費用咧，全部係由政府支持嘅，就成立咗一個咧上面所講嘅第2級嗰個專項嘅服務。呢啲服務全部都係免費嘅。咁第2級嗰個專項嘅服務其實包括係啲乜嘢咧？其實主要咧佢哋除咗係做一啲 publicity 嘅嘢之外咧，另一個咧就係做 gatekeeper， 就係我哋開放咗俾所有嘅團體組織，然之後咧佢哋如果係需要揾到有疑似個案，即係需要一啲精神科嘅治療嘅，都可以有一個綠色嘅通道轉去精神科。因為我身份我係仲係前線嘅工作人員，我係一個精神科醫生，咁所以我嘅身份咧又係精神衞生委員會，又係一個前線嘅工作人員，亦都係一啲民間團體嘅康復機構嘅一啲顧問。咁所以咧我就串聯咗咧唔同嘅機構。我仲有一個身份咧，就係衛生局嘅資助委員會嘅成員，咁就會津助咧民間組織去推動關於有關 mental health 嘅相關嘅嘢。咁所以咧有呢一個嘅便利咧，我嘅身份喺唔同嘅時間會做唔同嘅工作，但係喺整體推動裏面咧，所以我哋可以推動到呢個4級聯網嘅服務。因為當我進行第2級嘅時候咧，你冇資源係做唔到。咁我哋喺2008年開始由同一間 NGO 開始合作，去到今年咧，我哋提供3間，有5個服務點。咁所有呢啲服務咧，唔係單純係做一個counseling， 我哋包括咧係佢哋有大概係30% 嘅時間咧，係用喺社區上面嘅小組嘅宣傳教育工作。咁喺呢個工作裏面咧，我哋多咗一啲新嘅 referral 嚟我哋嘅醫療系統裏面，但係嗰個病人數咧，其實係冇提升嘅。因為一路我哋都係監察住個數據咧，都係大概每年有1000到1200個全新嘅個案登記。咁所以咧，亦都睇得到啦。雖然我哋澳門咧係一個精神科醫生咧對大概45000個人口。咁如果響我哋 MHC 呢個成員裏面做嘅工作咧，我哋亦都係同時亦都有一個數據嘅監測， 就係、譬如自殺嘅數據。咁喺澳門嘅狀況裏面咧，亦都有一啲唔同嘅情況。就係、澳門因為開始賭業之後咧，出年就係第10年啦。咁我哋每年大概接近3000萬嘅遊客。咁從自殺數據裏面咧，我哋睇到一個現象咧，我哋有啲年份咧，大概係12% 到20% complete suicide 係外地人。咁所以咧就你睇到我哋做嘅工作，我哋嘅建議，所以我哋就係話第一個我哋會即係咧頭先所講嘅4級聯網嘅融合服務啦，關注一啲特別嘅人群啦，仲有就係一啲外地僱員嘅精神健康啦，外地嘅學生啦，咁所以你睇到咧，我哋都係因應翻我哋一路監測住個狀況，由唔同嘅渠道我哋收集我哋嘅數據。然之後咧，再由我哋精神健康委員會有10名嘅成員咧，就總結每年咧，就向特首咧提交一份年度報告。咁我哋用嘅模式咧，都係用一個 metric model 點樣去睇翻我哋嘅服務，但係可以我哋反思翻去睇，因為我哋專業嘅人員係比較好缺乏。我哋預測咧嚟緊10年、20年咧，無論係護理人員甚至係專科醫生咧，其他嘅專業嘅人員咧都係唔足夠。資源我哋係攞到但係請唔到。呢個好明顯，我哋而家仲係用緊一啲退休嘅人士幫我哋手做嘢。咁所以我哋咧就冇好清晰嘅 evaluation 點樣去量度佢嘅 outcome。咁但係咧，我哋響用我哋一啲其他嘅數據，從世界衛生組織喺2003年嘅時候所推動嘅一個10大行動建議裏面，我哋就因應呢10大嘅行動建議，一路去量度住我哋澳門嘅精神健康嗰個服務嘅狀況。咁你睇到啦，因為如果係一個精神病患者喺澳門咧，佢係獲得一個全免費嘅服務嘅，包括就算用一啲 long acting 嘅 injection 啦，2000幾蚊針咧，都係完全免費嘅。所以喺治療方面咧，係一定保證到唔會因為有精神病而因經濟而唔獲得治療。喺澳門嚟講咧，呢個係絕對唔會出現嘅。而我哋嗰個 waiting list 咧，亦都係唔會長嘅。普通嘅個案係4個禮拜內，其他嗰啲咧係甚至係1個禮拜至2，因為我哋有個4環聯網嗰個服務咧，其實係嗰個可以同NGO 啊或者其他嘅機構嘅轉介咧，喺過去10年裏邊，我哋證實咧係佢哋所有嘅轉介，我哋都會及時冇理佢哋嘅。咁唯一啲我哋比較難做到嘅咧，就係響監控社區精神衞生方面啦，同埋研究方面咧，我哋係推動我哋其實已經係獲得咗一個批准，去進行一個大型嘅流行病學研究。但係一個好好彩咧，就係因為其中有一啲logistic嘅過程裏面咧，當佢再重評估嘅時候咧，就暫時推動唔到出嚟，又要重新嚟過。咁所以嗰個步伐咧，好似頭先講個情況，我哋唔係一條直線就可以一步到位，反而會有好多彎彎曲曲。無論係好似香港咁樣有2個心，一個就係話有心，係嘛？同埋有一班我唔記得咗陳醫生頭先，我一時間空白咗啊！頭先陳醫生講嘅2個心，我相信澳門亦都係同樣係一班有心同埋有能力嘅人。咁所以我相信今日嘅聚會咧，就係我哋一齊達到呢個目標。咁我追翻個 schedule，我而家喺呢度結束。謝謝大家。
好，唔該晒侯醫生。好，聽完4個專題嘅演講之後咧，相信大家咧都有好多嘅心裏邊嘅提問啦，或者一啲嘅回應嘅。咁接住落嚟咧，我哋係一個公開同埋互動討論嘅環節。咁我哋好高興可以邀請到平等機會委員會政策及研究召集人謝永齡博士，連同幾位嘅嘉賓，包括香港精神健康議會顧問、香港中文大學醫學院陳家乃榮耀臨床教授、香港理工大學康復治療科學系副學系主任曾永康教授， 以及香港大學社會工作及社會行政學系副教授謝樹基博士，係請咁多位嘅嘉賓上台同大家做呢一個嘅討論，有請晒各位。好，咁謝永年博士，咁我將時間交俾你啦嚇。
多謝你。可唔可以俾個咪俾啊？今日嘅程序咧就係我哋開始問問題，咁咧我哋每個人咧就問一個問題，然後咧就希望Professor Rosen 就答啦，係Commissioner Hart 答啦。咁就台下咧即係坐咗一朝咧，我都一定容許大家問問題。咁我哋嗱嗱聲問咗一 round 嘅，到你哋。既然專家嚟到咧，就梗係問啲專家啦嚇。My first question to you two is that, let's say this morning, you two were appointed by the Chief Executive of Hong Kong to be the Secretary for Health here in Hong Kong. I would like to ask you what two things that you would like to do, and what one thing that you said, no, I don't want to do it. But let's hear from Professor Rosen first. If you were the Secretary for Health here in Hong Kong, name two things that you would do, and one thing that you won't. Please. Yeah.
George, I think you should start. You've been there.
The first thing I would do would be to set up a mental health commission. And then the second thing I would do would be to say, I don't want responsibility for the Mental Health Commission. The leader of your government needs responsibility because this is not a health issue. This is an issue that spans all of life and all of policy.
Okay. Good.
What wouldn't I do? I'll think about that one.
I think I would consider this being a jurisdictional context, not just a federated context like ours. But we have one of our commissions that is a commissioning commission. It has control of the mental health budget. One of the problems that I understand happens in the clusters, and what I was going to say though, if I was put in this position, the first thing I would ask for is a honeymoon. A honeymoon, so I could think and see what was going on. But I hear from Dr. Chan and others that there are these issues about clusters, and mental health funding not only is less than others, but maybe it can also be siphoned sideways into other spheres. So to protect the resources to start with, it might be helpful, and as I say, this is a practical jurisdiction, not a federal overview body. It would be good to have some circumscribing of the budget. Now, the dilemma is whether the Mental Health Commission wants to spend its time managing a budget, or whether it wants to say, we want a parallel body who circumscribes the mental health budget and ensure, first of all, that it's protected, and secondly, that it grows at the same rate and in the same proportions as other aspects of medicine and surgery. Okay. And otherwise, I agree entirely with George. Yes. Let's get a mental health.
He's a very intelligent man. The thing I wouldn't do, I wouldn't set up a governance structure for the Commission that wasn't transparent. I would set up a governance structure that ultimately was accountable to the elected body of Hong Kong, and that basically gave it the permission and the powers to go into places that So I wouldn't constrain it.
Okay, that's great.
And what I would do
yes.
is that I wouldn't do it alone. I wouldn't do it either administratively, bureaucratically, or as just as an act of government. What I would do is pull together a task force to form a commission that has all the stakeholders represented, and their goals then come to the foreground about why we need a mental health commission. So I wouldn't do it alone, but another thing I would do is make sure that it had powers of inquiry set in the legislation, and that it had powers of audit, so that we can see where the resources are going to, and whether that's represented in full-time equivalents on the ground of mental health services, both in the public sector and the NGO sector. And it should also pull in the interests of the private sector as well, because really in Australia we're similar. We have a public sector, a fee-for-service sector which is insurable, and which I understand is not here, and also we have the NGO sector. And we need to work with all the people that we have together. We need to get the synergies of those three sectors working together. So I would also involve them in the task force to form a commission.
Okay, that's great. I will invite Professor Chen to ask the next question.
Well, when we talk about mental health, most people put the emphasis on mental ill health rather than mental health. Even being a psychiatrist myself, for many, many years, I was preoccupied with mental ill health. And we got to change to some extent. And in fact, I was very impressed with Ms. Hammond's presentation, talking about people telling us, please listen to us. And the three things that you mentioned, one is about relationship and connection. The second is about social stigma. But social stigma is also about relationship. And the third one is self-control, being able to control one's own life, to improve one's own life, and to make it a valuable existence of one's own life. And in fact, I also believe that psychiatry should be based on how to make people happy, not just how to treat people when they are unhappy. And for that, I really want to ask the experts now. It seems that relationship is very, very important. How do we promote relationship? How does the Mental Health Commission put an indicator on assessing and evaluating relationship and the progress in it?
Well, that's a hard one. Well, there's different, I guess, let's break it down. Relationships between partners working together in the sector. I mean, I think you could actually put a measure around that. One of the things that we've discussed in the Commission was ensuring that, for example, every service that receives government funding should be able to demonstrate that it is working in partnership, that it's not duplicating services, and that indeed it's reaching out to the people who are using its services and learning about its own performance from them. So I mean, there are ways that you could put markers into the system that can measure that kind of relationship. In terms of the broader agenda, though, of the Commission, I mean, I think one of the performance indicators we've actually set ourselves is how much can we inspire and motivate and indeed make act other people. So one of the things that we're thinking about, you know, we report on our performance, and we're just about to sort of do some internal planning about our own evaluation. One of the things that I'm considering is how do how do we get out there and explain to people, and how do we actually demonstrate movements in the sedimentary layers of our system as a result of relationships that we have established. I think a really good example is, for example, our work with the Australian Human Rights Commission. And I know that there's representatives of your civil organisation here today. We have forged a very strong relationship with that organisation. And they have been particularly active in our work and advocacy around ending the use of seclusion and restraint. Another good example is us influencing the agenda of Health Workforce Australia, who have got a lot of money. They have a lot of money. And one of the things that we think is really important about dealing with some of our workforce challenges, we have a significant workforce challenges in the mental health sector in Australia, is training up and encouraging and developing peer workers, so people who have actually lived with mental illness, are in recovery, that actually worked within as part of a multidisciplinary team, as part of a service. We need, our view as a commission is we need to increase the peer workforce in Australia, and that will indeed help some of the outcomes that we're trying to strive towards. So we could measure that. How do we measure? I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know whether I've even answered it. Have I answered it? I don't know.
Professor Wilson?
Yes, I'll assist and supplement the non-answer with my non-answer. I come back to the primary question, and the primary question was about, can we have a true mental health service, not just a mental illness service? And I think, and one of the slides I didn't have time for, was can we have a healthy psychiatry, which is rather than a psychiatry about pathology. And we can do it, to start with, by making sure that we look after the mental health of the whole community. And this comes back to the point about promotion and prevention being so important, that it's already been stated today. But I see it in terms of what our training is. Our training is to detect pathology and to treat symptoms, where as often we should widen our training to not just look at the micro issues and the micro skills of how to deal with patients and their families, and just to look after people with mental illness, but to say we have a wide responsibility which we should teach. Now, community psychiatry means you need to look after your whole community, your whole sector, your whole patch, and that means also developing the skills to relate to whole stakeholder groups, of consumers, of families, of the general community, their concerns, the stressors we talked about, the increased stressors in life, and they may come with increased education, and we have to deal with that too, to look at the needs of the whole community. The next thing is early intervention. Those early intervention structures, starting with headspace programs, which the federal government in our country are now rolling out, and started by Professor McGorry, who was the Australian of the Year. But these are now looking at how to get young people, when they have any disorder, to go into a one-stop shop, and they can get general practice services, they can get drug and alcohol, mental health, sexual health services, whatever services they need in a non-stigmatising way. It's usually set up in a special one-stop shop front near where the young people gather, near the cinemas, near the skating rinks, wherever young people gather. So that's another example of having a healthy approach with youth-friendly spaces that they decorate themselves, and they can say, I'm just going to see my general practitioner. But behind that, they will then get referred, if need be, to one of the other specialty teams. So I think that's healthy psychiatry. I think working on social inclusion, and you can measure social inclusion, there are some very good measures. I don't think we have got there yet in Australia with the measures we're developing, and that's a debate. Sorry, okay? But we still have. Is there something happening? Thank you. Okay, no, we've got it. Thank you. So we sort of get there with how we measure social inclusion, but I think it is possible to measure it, and internationally there are measures of that we should include with our clinical measures that and functional measures that we have in our national suite of outcome measures. It's good that we measure outcome. We haven't got as far as social inclusion yet, or recovery, all the other dimensions of recovery. Recovery and resilience is healthy psychiatry. If we teach people how to bounce back from a crisis, a life crisis, I use the technical term bounce back ability. Very technical term, bounce back ability. The ability to be brilliant in the face of a crisis, and some of those skills need learning, and they need some people who are professionally trained to help people through an ordinary life crisis, which we don't have to define as a mental disorder, not even as an adjustment disorder. There's an ordinary language for that, and it's most well expressed in the Chinese culture as both an opportunity and a risk. So we can deal with it, and I think all those things are healthy psychiatry, and there's lots more examples.
Okay, thank you. Next I bounce back to Professor Zhang.
All right, okay, thank you. So as a researcher, I would like to ask a question about research funding, and also funding about research and service. Now, I agree with Dr. Chen that he said earlier that now the government funding in Hong Kong to mental health services is not enough. So I think if this is not enough for service, I would say that the funding going to research is more limited. You know what happens in the university is that now all of us are working very hard to bid for research funding. I don't know whether it is the same in Australia. Is that in Hong Kong, the priority will be going to animal studies, not human studies. I think many of you do not know about that, but I think my colleagues from CityView and from Hong Kong, they know about that. So I would like to go back to the slide that has been mentioned by Commissioner Hammond on the first critical success factor. Now the first two words is build active. So I think research is very important. So I would like to learn from the Australian government how you are going to convince the government, as the commissioner, to increase research to mental health services and also research.
Sure. Look, I think we have a great opportunity to do that through the review that the government has given us to do. The government is actually, and our new Minister for Health, Minister Peter Dutton, is actually very, very interested in research and health research and medical research. He's also, I think, got responsibility for those areas as well. So in the terms of reference, though, we are expecting any day now from the government for this review. We're expecting that they will ask us to look at research. So there's a very practical way that we can do so. The current situation in Australia in terms of mental health research is a bit odd. The National Health and Medical Research Council, the NHMRC, is a government-funded organisation that basically disperses grants, monies to all areas of health and medical research in Australia. And that's done on a competitive basis, a peer-reviewed basis. And traditionally over the years, mental health has been quite unsuccessful at securing as a percentage to reflect, for example, the burden of disease and mental illness, those grants. So as a result, as part of the 2011 budget package that I talked about earlier, the government actually decided to quarantine some of the money that was sitting in the NHMRC bank account and say we are going to invest this just in mental health. And we're actually going to talk to the research community about identifying areas that we should actually go out and seek applications for funding. So I think it's a work in progress. I think there are some useful and encouraging signs, but I think we have similar problems to what you described.
To follow that lead, I think it's also a great innovation that the Australian federal government have come through, after a lot of lobbying I might add, with translational research centres. There are 4 national translational research centres, 3 of which are based in Sydney, and they are on early intervention in psychosis particularly, but early intervention strategies. Secondly, on suicide and how to prevent suicide. The third one is on dual disorder between drug and alcohol and mental illness. And there is a 4th one in Queensland about service system development. and trying to pull together the best available research in all those areas and make that openly disseminated to all the stakeholder groups, and to involve the stakeholder groups also in their boards in terms of setting their priorities. But the other thing is, you've got to think about what is the role of the Commission in this. And like Georgie was saying earlier on, I don't think it's the role of the Mental Health Commission to do research or fund research, because that would preoccupy us, like if we were looking after individual complaints rather than looking at clusters of complaints. We need to look over all research and help the research bodies and the universities, as we're doing in our State Commission in New South Wales, to try and look at their priorities for research and what they are applying for, and to make sure that they are not just animal research. Mind you, I claim animal rights too. I'm an animal too. I have rights. So that's another important issue that we should also be making sure that we try and set the priorities of research around how we can best improve services. Not everything, but the priorities have been much more on pure research, and now we're looking at much more applied research, and particularly on how to improve outcomes. And then we need to tie that together with training, because one of the things that doesn't get through to workforce training is what is the latest stuff that we can do that reliably produces a good outcome. International studies says that there is a 17-year plus gap between knowing the research is sound in an innovation and an intervention and having it applied and disseminated. We need to shorten that gap. So we need to bring research and training and workforce supervision together, and to try and make sure that they work together in developing priorities.
Okay. Professor Derek, a question?
I want to continue and also advance the discussion. When I attend to Professor Rosen and also Commissioner Harmon's presentation, including Dr. Chen's presentation, there is one theme, and I want to focus on that theme, which is about service user. I'm going to ask two questions surrounding service user, and then I will explain in Cantonese so that Ellen and Georgie will have a little bit of time to reflect on the question. Earlier, Dr. Chen quotes the saying from Lancet, arguing that is, well, actually not arguing, but a very strong, useful declaration. There's no health without mental health. My additional remark is there's no real health services transformation. There's no mental health commission without the leadership and also participation from the service users. My question to our guests now are two. One is, if there is a person with service background or a small group of people, they really want to rise up to become leader, to be the influential voices, what would be your advice to them to think, to consider carefully before rising to that role? The second question is, as professional, as bureaucracy, as government administrators, etc., what we can do, or what can we do to enable these individuals or small group of people to be able to do exactly that? 我想問兩個好簡單嘅問題。我覺得今日嘅討論咧，嗰個嘅服務使用者咧係一個好主要嘅中心。我咧就想問兩位海外嘅專家咧兩個問題。第一個咧就如果我哋在座係有服務使用者背景，有時係服務使用者，亦都有時其實我哋專業人士，不過咧有服務使用者嘅經驗。兩個問題好簡單。第一咧就如果我想個別或者係小組性想成為一個更加有影響力嘅人士或者群眾，我要留意，我要小心啲咩咧？當我未行到呢個位之前，第二個問題我就問專業嘅人士啊、政府啊、NGO 啊，喺嗰個制度方面有啲咩可以做，去幫呢啲嘅聲音更加壯大，幫呢啲嘅影響更加 visible。Thank you so much.
Thank Thank you very much for the question. So, as I said at my commission, we put people first. One of the first decisions that we worked at, the first decision the commission made was to put people at the heart of everything that we do. And we translate that into practice by a series of very practical things. We have people with lived experience and family members on our commission. We have a positive discrimination policy. So in all of our job adverts, we say, we'd like you to disclose whether or not you've had mental health difficulties. You don't have to, but we'd like you to. And the number of people that have actually said to us, that was amazing. That I was terrified. I didn't know whether or not I diminished my chances of getting that job, but it felt incredible to do that. And thank you. So we've got a paid participation policy as well, which is where we say to people, consumers, service users, families, you actually have expertise. And we actually should remunerate. When you give us that expert advice, we should actually pay you for that advice. So we have a policy with some guidelines around it, but that we implement. In terms of the first question, what advice would I give?
Stop. I translate, please. 政府專員咧，我哋着重有第一身康復經驗嘅人士，我哋特別咧聘用啲人士。當聘用或者係揾呢啲人士幫助嘅時候咧，我哋係有真金白銀咧咁俾佢哋嘅。Please.
Thank you. The first part of the question was, what advice would I give consumers and service users who want to get onto the sort of national advocacy and be part of national reform? There are two messages that I would give. First thing is choose your moments, choose the issues. Don't go in and want the entire world changed. Do that by stealth. Focus on the things that have the most meaning to you. And the second part of that is, and it's linked to the first message that I would give, leave your personal experience at the door. Make this about system reform. Join with others. Identify again those issues as a group of people that you think need changing. So you can have, rather than just focus on, I did this and I experienced that when I went to hospital and I, need this. It's about people with mental illness need this. The country needs this. Our society needs this. You have to leave a part of you at the door, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful or an uningenious way. I actually mean that in terms of getting better system and reform outcomes.
如果我想作為一個服務使用者，成為一個有影響嘅聲音咧，我有兩件事留意：集中一啲具影響力嘅事情。第二咧，唔係淨係單我自己個人經歷，要影響整個制度。Thank you so much.
John, my answer to the second part, which was how do we help people to do that? So there's a couple of things that we do as a commission. We've just launched a capacity building project. So as leaders in Australia, what we've said is we know that we need more consumers who are advocating at the national level. So we're actually going to put out a development program that actually works with individuals to broaden their skills, both in terms of governance and finance and how to sit around a board table, and other kind of areas of development. And the other thing I think I would say is, as leaders and as people who can influence others, we should always insist that people with lived experience are at the table.
作為制度點樣去推行呢個做法咧，就係要提供啲訓練啦，同埋堅持一種執着咧，一定係有服務使用者嘅聲音。Thank you so much, George.
My challenge is to remember the question. I think we have some very important examples of how the service user movement and the family care movement have advanced and empowered in Australia not to identify as victims, not as just sufferers. We all suffer, but some of them can give you great distress. But to go beyond that, what is there beyond being a survivor, including the survivor of the mental health system, as some people identify, is to help make that mental health system work and to be participants in the system. So one of the first things that happened was, first of all, we've had this 24 years of the Mental Health Service Conference that is co-owned by all the professions, plus service users, plus family carers, plus GP representation, and Indigenous representation, and transcultural, because we're, as Georgie said, we're a very transcultural nation. And that is represented because before the beginning of our big conference, which is in August every year, there is a consumer-only conference, there is a carer-only conference, there's often an Indigenous and a transcultural conference. In the last 3 days, we all come together in strength. And people who are from lived experience know who else is in the room who can help support them when they stand up and ask the best questions. Some senior clinicians are wary of coming to our conference, or have been in the past, because they think consumers will attack them. They won't attack them. What will happen is they will ask very, very pertinent questions, and we have to handle them. So those issues have helped us form a strong coalition, informal coalition. So in many ways, this conference is the front for a reform movement. And I think that's, but we're not allowed to say that. But it is. It has helped push a lot of reform in Australia. The other thing is, I mentioned to you that you've got to give service users and families, they must be able to claim legitimacy. One way to claim legitimacy is, as Georgie says, to be at the table of every important decision. To be at the table when services are evaluated. One of the ways of evaluating is the accreditation system on the basis of the national standards, and to have service users employed for money, as Georgie says, for good money, to be trained and also to be part of every survey, and also for carers, family carers, to be part of that. In our commissions, the National Commission has declared consumers. Our State Commission, our New South Wales Commission, by law, the legislation it was formed on states that at least one of the commissioners, of the formal commissioners, has to have a lived experience of mental illness. In fact, 2 of our commissioners, of the 4 deputy commissioners, have a lived experience. One is Indigenous, and the other one is little old me. And then there is a head commissioner as well, who is full-time. So having that sort of role as a consumer, and it's legitimated through legislation, and it's very enriching. At the service level, it is so enriching to have consumers and carers contributing to the service. And when the service is in danger of being in some ways degraded, they will stand up for your service, and they will also offer some of the best advice about how you can advance your service. So it's very enriching at every level, from the local level to the national level, to have those consumers. In terms of what is needed, first of all,
what is needed is translation.
服務使用者要提升遠勝過只係一個被傷害嘅人啦，繼續舉辦呢啲嘅聯席會議啊，攜手去改變服務啦，同埋有一樣好緊要咧，服務使用者喺多方面多角度咧扮演重要嘅角色，包括訓練啊、評估啊，同埋係審裁。多謝。
Okay. So the first thing that is needed when you're working as a consumer leader, consumer advocate, is you're standing up in public, and sometimes although, you know, maybe when you're making decisions on a national level, you should try and leave your personal experience out of it. When you are trying to tell people what it is like, you have to use your personal experience, because it is the most moving and qualitatively congruent and faithful thing that you have, if you have your personal experience. So you talk to your personal experience, and you may talk on a platform, and then people might come up and say, can you tell me more about that? And they pry into your personal life more than you really want to. So the first thing that consumers need to have, if they're going to have leadership roles, is to have a cover group. The term belongs to a family therapist called Carl Whisker from Madison, Wisconsin. who also said that all we professionals also need a colour grid, so we don't take our distress and trauma home, but we deal with it at work. And that's partly what the next themes conference is about. But the issue for consumers is consumer leaders do need to have people to debrief with and to protect them from people trying to be too intrusive in their lives, even though consumers will often use a powerful personal story to convey something that needs to be conveyed. The other thing is they need to learn that if there is criticism, they don't take it personally. I don't know, every prominent consumer I know has been told, oh, you're getting too close to the professional. Sorry? Yeah, the other consumers tell them, you're getting too close to the professionals, you're becoming like a professional, you're not identifying with us, the survivors. And but that happens with every non-dominant group. Aboriginal people would receive that from other Aboriginal people, saying, well, you're getting too close to the Caucasians, to the white people, or whatever. So, it is a common thing. And we need to resist that, and you don't take those sorts of critiques personally, because they're stereotypes. You've got to learn that when you're in a leadership position, you don't take all this personally, because they will do it to anyone who is in that position. The third thing is about you've got to have a strong sense of the absurd, because large organisations at some level are always absurd. And so you have to have a strong sense of humour, and I think that will sustain you in the long term. I teach my registrar that as well, because I think what I'm saying about consumers applies to professionals in those areas as well. Consumers feel these things very acutely, and I think they do need training into the role of leadership. And I think training is essential, and also qualifications. We get qualifications when we're taught these leadership management skills. Why don't they get qualifications? So we are now into degree courses for Aboriginal mental health workers, and we're into graduate diploma and diploma courses for consumer peer workers, and hopefully we'll get to university qualifications, which they can cash in for climbing up a system and having a career. So like us, they need not a psychiatric career, but a psychiatric career whether you're a professional or you're a consumer. It's bloody easy to get into, bloody hard to get out of. But they need to say, I can do my career development. If I get a degree in this stuff, I can also then advance in health administration or in some other field, in community services or whatever. A degree is a degree is a degree, and they have lived experience which can contribute to getting that.
服務使用者如果要成為一個公開嘅領袖咧，我哋可以接受訓練啦，可以係完成一啲嘅學位等等。如果能夠有效扮演呢個角色咧，有3個建議。第一咧都係繼續用自己自身嘅經驗；第二咧就能夠經得起批評；第三，你面對嗰啲荒謬嘅服務咧，我哋需要有一種嘅幽默感。多謝啊，Professor。
好啦，我哋仲有些少時間，不如台下有邊位有興趣發問嘅？
I'm a physical psychologist practicing locally. I very much welcome the idea of having a platform for dialogue, for understanding, as well as to give voices for the patients, as well as for patients themselves to voice out their needs and understand the fundamental questions about mental health issues in society. I started to practice some permaculture and then growing food, and I understand that one important principle is the soil. You can't have healthy soil before you can grow. I mean, even if the seed is very excellent, talented, without good soil, the plant just couldn't survive. So we got to look at the family context, the society context, the work context. So if you measure about employment, whether it is a very effective measure, a valid measure, because when we talk about returning to work, what kind of workplace are they got into? In which, say in Hong Kong, is highly competitive.
right? I mean, whether you got another identity of being a failed worker, or whether we could recognize unpaid role, say, in your family, be a good mother, good father, good brother, carer. We've got to have a larger perspective about what is success in the society. And actually, I wanted to echo the questions about actually the profession and patient dichotomy. One of the context, as I said, about the social issue is about inequality. I mean, that's why people got marginalized, because you are the failed people. We can't really associate with society. So if we don't address inequality, the uneven or skewed distribution of resources in society, we're bound to have a lot of mentally ill people because they are failures. So if we start to look at, think about inequality, and we start thinking about starting in clinic, I mean the inequality between profession and patient. The patients themselves are, in fact, they are experts in their life experience. They're experts in their life, they're experts in the survival in a very harsh society. So if we start thinking about inequality in the clinic, and then really give patient empowerment, I mean the voice within the clinic, and then start to think about our role as a profession, as well as our role as a human being, that we are all just people.
好，Mary 就問專業人士同埋病人咧一個公平嘅一個現象，要點睇？
So the first part, I'll just address the first part about work. Now, I know I sound like an economic rationalist because I talked about, getting people back to work and participation. But at the end of the day, that's what people are saying to us that brings them meaning. Something to get you out of bed in the morning, something to give you economic independence. And we're realistic. I mean, not everybody will be able to get and hold down a paid job, but we should give them every opportunity to do so. And as I said, volunteering and unpaid work is also an option. Workplaces can also damage people. We know that. Psychological injuries in Australia in terms of compensation is going through the roof. But as an employer myself, I know that I need to be flexible. I know that as an employer with a budget, that it costs me a lot of money to replace an excellent employee who has a mental health problem, who needs a bit of flexibility and time off every now and then. Rather than get rid of them or say, sorry, you're not fit to work, it's a greater long-term investment for me as a budget manager to invest in them and say, take the time that you need, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. So I mean, I think we've got to think about these things in the long term, not just about, and I understand the competitive environment of your culture and it's actually very similar in Australia and becoming more so. But I think I would encourage workers and employers to think differently about it, not look at the short term, but think about the long term.
哈文嘅意思咧就係要長遠嘅投資，要對啲僱主咧係要睇得遠啲，就唔係淨係講目前。
The advantage you have in this community in Hong Kong is you do value education, you do value in the role of the individual and individual advancement, but you also value the culture. And I think they can be mutually supportive. They don't have to be contradictory, the individualistic versus the collectivistic. They don't have to be in competition or at war. They can support each other. We need the tools, the cultural tools of rites of passage to stop people, say, with a severe mental illness or psychosis or schizophrenia from getting into a limbo state, getting stuck in life as perpetual children in their parents' households while their parents are still alive. We need to get that sense of growth throughout life and rites of passage going. We also need to use the cultural tool of extended kinship network. Georgie talked about relationships. A lot of people have talked about relationships. The issue of having an extended kinship network, I was talking about the pit stop team. You need a team that supports you in what you do in your life. These are important cultural tools. They also translate into clinical tools. The extended network is sometimes replaced by mental health services when you haven't got a family around you. You need a proxy for a family. Sometimes that's a mental health team, particularly an assertive community team for somebody who is isolated and with severe mental illness. And sometimes they help you reconnect with your family as well as doing the clinical things and making sure your physical and psychiatric care is okay. Two key words I wanted to mention. First of all, I love the analogy of the permaculture and developing the soil first. It translates, those images sometimes really help us know, give us a map of where we're going. And the other map that might be appeal to you in a similar way is the one called woodshedding, invented by John Strauss in Yale University. And we have written on this in the context of severe mental illness. So if you want references about this, I can provide them. But the issue there is people seem to sometimes be doing nothing when they have a severe and persistent mental illness. They're not advancing, so they get put on a shelf. They get put into a maintenance stream, so-called, where nothing happens for them. They're just maintained either in hospital or in the community. Sometimes people in their family homes make a sort of back ward in the back bedroom, and nothing happens. And if you do very detailed studies, you find that some people, many people in that situation, are trying to prepare to make another step in their life, but they need the encouraging encouraging platform, or in permaculture terms, they need the soil to be prepared so they feel comfortable in making the next step. The idea of woodshedding is you rehearse in the woodshed until you're ready to come out and perform. That's what jazz trumpeters do. And so that's what these people are seen as doing, and there is a literature on this, and we've done part of this, so it relates very well to that permaculture too. The last issue I just want to
translate嗰時你過嚟嘅，病人要成長，病人要家庭去維係住生存，咁唔單止係生存，而係話嗰個醫療，即使冇家庭嘅病人咧，都需要醫療嘅人員啦，好似一個家庭咁，即係一齊成長。另外一個角度咧就係森林啊，而家講緊一啲土壤，即使係病咧，都要係維係住一個情況，喺森林有土壤成長咗之後咧，再重投社會。Yes.
The last issue of demarginalising people and how nobody wants to live on the margins all their lives. Some artists choose to do it, but people with mental illness do not choose to be on the margins. So, and most people don't. So we really need to find ways of dealing with that. And the ways that we know that work are, first of all, social stigma, challenging social stigma programs, most of which involve, you've got to look at the difference between behaviour versus attitudes. They measure attitudes in stigma studies, but only recently have they moved to studying behaviour. And the way to get a better outcome for people with mental illness is to get other people in the community to get to know them, and get to know that they're not frightening people, to get to know that they're creative people often, and that they're not harmful in a violent way on the whole. And to get those people approximated to other people in the community, and it raises the next issue, which is social inclusion, that have to be included in ordinary living in the community. And you can measure that, and there are strategies for that. So these are really important demarginalising things. But the third thing is what I mentioned about legitimacy. Give people with mental illnesses and their families legitimate roles for their lived experience as surveyors, as commissioners, as people in leadership roles with adequate support, so they have legitimacy for their expertise.
最後尾個點咧就係千祈唔好被邊緣化，即使係精神病者咧，都要接觸其他人士，令到社區人士咧知道佢哋嘅需要，知道精神病，否則咧就即係歧視嘅情況咧就即係較容易出現。咁我睇得到高醫生到咗啦，局長到咗，即係有人捐我哋，但係咧就好多人都想問問題，不如我問你啦，因為專家就講就係香港咧係需要一個精神復康嘅委員會、精神健康委員會。咁我問你， 高先生唔使舉手啊，你睇下呢度嗰個文情就得。贊成有一個 mental health commission 嘅參加者請舉手。咁我 propose 呢個題目，我唔方便佢啊嚇。咁啊，請大家即係睇下呢啲，我諗都有嘅。I was just saying, those who support a commission of mental health in Hong Kong, please raise your hand, with the exception of Dr. Ko. OK， 唔該。咁其實咧就我仲有一個問題，即係我睇好少4個大學嘅即係教授坐埋喺一堂，好少5堂添。咁其實做我哋呢行咧，最叻係咩？最叻接法。咁我坐喺度坐成朝，我記起一樣嘢，就係好多年前咧，唔知20零年前咧，香港係有一個叫做Alternative Hong Kong Report， 香港嘅另類施政報告，就係俾即係反映政府嘅一啲政策啊諸如此類嘅嘢。咁我不如問台上4位，問完台下問台上。如果有人搞呢類嘅咁嘅 platform， 有冇作用去參加咧？因為即係你冇嗰個 policy 就冇錢，冇嗰個 commission 就冇 direction， 就冇人去精神病患者咧，即係大家知道咧，即係較為傷一啲，唔係幾即係 vocal 嘅，即係較為冇 vocal。咁學者都叫佢話，咁即係佢。3位4位啫，有冇支持啊？
我諗我亦會支持，但係咧有一個條件，就唔可以定罪。呢個因為咧一定要互助先係一個精神。
OK。
我想講一句咧，就係我啱喺美國Philadelphia 翻嚟，咁UPenn 嗰度咧邀請我講書，咁我又見過佢嗰個嘅 mental health commission 啊。咁咧，佢哋嗰個 terminology 咧，我好出奇地覺得佢哋真係好 updated。因為點解咧？佢話俾我聽，我哋而家開會咧，too excited They are saying that when they are having a conference, they are not allowed to use the term rehabilitation. They are using the term recovery. So they are very updated. So to answer that question is that I would participate because 因為咧作為學者，我哋支法係咧口咧就冇咁多機會講，咁所以我自己覺得有好多時候我出好多 paper 咧，擠一拉嚟嘅啫，去研究身體，但係咧就係做政策嘅官員同埋同事咧，未必有咁多機會睇，所以我就覺得我會參與就係將我自己嘅 research finding 咧係講出嚟。
我成日都話，即係點解做 research 就想影響政策嘅。跟住。呢
幾個 platform 喺香港特別係重要。我喺紐西蘭咧生活咗教書同埋工作22年，我翻嚟嘅時間咧又發覺特別香港好中意、好需要有一個咁樣嘅 platform， 因為咧呢一個嘅醫療同埋社福嘅分家咧係需要有一個好清楚嘅主導同埋方向，咁所以有一個另一個級數嘅委員咧就能夠達成呢個工作。
OK， 好，完場啦。就係20年前咧，如果你仲記得喺某個社區喺香港咧，就好反對即係有精神病人設施。話俾你聽，20年後嘅今日一樣反對。即使係當都想 launch 一啲 scheme 咧，唔係咁容易。咁我希望即係我哋呢個 platform， 即係正話我提出一個另類嘅報告又好，咩香港嘅時候咧，即係希望多啲聲會支持啦，同埋大家學者支持啦。我哋絕對唔係話敵對，而係話即係表現社會上嘅需要，好嘛？咁我哋今日呢個環節到呢為止，多謝晒各位。
Thank you for the very fruitful discussion。有請多位嘉賓晒可以到台下就座。咁你就多謝晒，即係頭先非常之精彩嘅一個嘅討論啦。我哋就即係發咗一個夢啊，好似又去到我哋發夢試過做食物及衛生局局長啦。我哋又發夢去到我哋有好多資源，無限嘅資源去做一啲嘅研究啊，一啲嘅服務啊咁樣。跟住咧就甚至乎我哋嘅政策係有康復嘅，有復原咧，有復原嘅人士，有家屬嘅參與嘅。 咁啊，希望咧呢個夢咧，我哋可以快啲真係達成啦。咁啊 ，Stephen， 我都想問下你啦。頭先咧，陳教授就講過，就話即係要做一個健康嘅精神科醫生，係咪啊？即係唔係淨係睇個病嘅，要有健康嘅。我問下你，咁你係咪一個健康嘅社工咧？
我希望我係啦嚇，咁亦都希望咧，在座咁多位都係喺你自己嘅工作上邊喺你自己嘅專業上邊，喺你嘅家庭嗰方面，喺你嗰個生活上邊，都係一個好健康好似頭先Professor 所講咧，就係要有幽默感幽默面對人生。其實咧呢個夢咧能唔能夠達成咧？其實中國人都有句説話，就係話千里之行，始於足下。亦都有講話有志者事竟成。我哋希望咧呢個夢咧係能夠實踐落去，亦都能夠好快嘅，我哋將呢個夢咧能夠透過大家齊心協力咧，我哋能夠達至呢一個夢想嘅。
咁咧就為咗顯示咧，我哋大家都非常支持推動呢個全民嘅精神健康政策。咁我哋咧首先咧之後咧會進行一個簡單而隆重嘅啟動儀式嘅。咁但係未進行呢個啟動禮之前咧，我哋先請我哋另一位嘅主禮嘉賓，食物及衛生局局長高永文 BDS 太平紳士上台為我哋講幾句説話。有請高局長。
各位朋友大家好首先我道歉先，因為咧有其他嘅活動咧唔可以全程咧喺度同大家參與呢一個討論。咁但係咧我知道時間都緊張咧，咁就同大家分享一下我點樣睇即係我哋現在個精神健康嘅服務。咁精神健康嘅服務同埋精神健康康復嘅服務咧，係一個大家都好關注重視課題。咁實際上我喺我2012年被上任之前咧，其實我都好欣賞咧我哋嘅好多嘅團體咧就其實都已經有同我傾偈，亦都係特別咧係同我提到亦都反映咗好多關於存在於我哋香港精神健康服務嘅種種嘅問題。咁食物及衞生局負責制定精神健康服務嘅政策，咁我哋都非常明白到咧，若果我哋唔能夠妥善咁樣係處理精神健康問題咧，係對社會咧同埋對我哋醫療環境咧，都係一個好負面嘅影響。亦都咧喺好多嘅數據，我睇到咧喺醫管局早幾日同我嘅報告裏面咧都睇到咧，我哋唔同嘅專科嘅病人咧，嗰個就診率一路高咧，其中增長得最快嘅就係精神科，最快係可以話拋離其他嘅專科。咁儘管政府同埋醫管局咧，同埋其他有關嘅部門咧，其實都逐步咁樣增加高對精神健康服務嗰個投資資源。而現時嚟講，香港醫管局精神科每年嘅總開支大概已經佔醫管局總開支嘅8.7%嘅8.7%。咁其他社會福利嘅領域方面咧，亦都有一定嘅資源投放呢度，但係仍然咧有好大嘅即係嗰個服務嘅即係期望嘅落差。咁呢方面咧，我哋最近同醫管局咧就係去重新睇過下精神健康服務嘅範疇。咁其中咧呢個分類係咪啱咧？我又即係可能有唔同嘅意見啦。首先咧就同我傾嗰陣咧，我哋分類咧，首先咧喺一個比較主流啲嘅精神健康服務裏面咧，即係或者我哋叫做 adult psychiatry 裏面咧就分開重症嘅精神病，同埋咧其他咧我哋叫情緒病。不過我都留意到咧喺即係呢個領域裏面，其實好多唔同嘅病同埋好多詞語嘅嚇。重症嘅精神病，我哋講緊主要係一啲精神分裂或者其他嘅或者係抑鬱、躁症嘅抑鬱等等或者大煲啦，即係好緊要啲病。另外咧就係一啲情緒嘅病， 咁呢兩方面咧，其實都喺社會上咧即係有唔同嘅關注。譬如話，如果重症精神病嚟講咧，好多時大家就關注緊嗰個精神科嘅藥物啦，嗰個精神科嗰啲譬如話嗰個個案經理而家發展緊嗰個速度啦，嗰個方向係正確啦，做得夠唔夠啦，咁多呢方面。如果喺情緒病嗰方面咧，我哋面對問題咧，數量咧增加得好犀利。呢個會唔會係同我哋最近10幾年咧係有一個領域嘅工作咧比較取得少少嘅效果咧，可能有關，或者係整體嘅社會嘅嗰個開放咧都比較成熟咧，可能有關嘅。當然可能亦都係因為社會嘅種種外在壓力，形成到市民嘅心理衞生嗰方面亦都有問題啦嚇。可能咧加埋咧，就令到呢一類嘅病咧係好多。咁現在咧，據我所知咧，都係喺我哋嘅精神科專科門診裏面咧，造成數量上咧係好大嘅一個即係一個比率嘅咧，都係呢一類嘅病人。咁所以呢類病人咧，亦都有佢另外一個問題。喺過去嗰10幾年，正如我講咧，喺一個領域裏面咧，就係話喺嗰個精神病嘅標籤嗰方面咧，的確咧，我哋嘅業界其實係特首咧做咗好多工作。譬如以中重症嘅精神病嚟講咧，喺大概10零年前咧，我哋開始推行一個做即係識別及早介入嘅一個計劃咧。喺嗰個時候咧，我哋嘅精神科係有關嘅我哋嘅醫護人員同我哋嘅總辦事處嘅同事一齊去諗一個宣傳策略嗰陣咧，就帶出咗一個我哋叫思覺失調呢個名稱。咁呢個咧係你可以話意外或者意料之內咧，係引致到呢一個即係對呢一個計劃咧係相對成功咁樣咧，令到一部分嘅重症嘅精神病人自己或者佢嘅家人咧，對呢個病咧冇咁大戒心，而肯出嚟睇。咁呢個係一點。另外一點咧，我哋好多精神科嘅機構亦都咧做好多工作咧，就係對個別單位就係做咗好多嘅喺當區做咗好多健康教育工作等等咧，令到咧有一啲存在已久嘅標籤咧，亦都受文化少少，例如青山咁樣呢個當然肯定都有一部分有青山嘅同事或者康復者。嗰個同我哋10幾20年前咧講起青山嗰啲人咧，可能話仲俾人青山咁樣咁而家少咗嘅。咁會唔會咁樣咧？亦都多咗病人咧肯去睇病咧？咁呢個都情緒病都係。以前我哋咧就要叫做我哋又叫做可能係神經緊張或者各類嘅名。而家咧，就算我自己過去幾年咧喺私家度睇病咧，我問病人嘅病歷即係雖然我睇骨科啫，但係我問佢你有冇睇啲病咁樣，咁都已經好多病人會自動話俾我聽，我食緊情緒藥醫生。咁即係變相佢亦都話俾我聽，其實佢可能有少少抑鬱，定係重咗輕，我唔知啦。咁所以咧係呢方面係好咗，但係亦都帶嚟另外一啲嘅問題。咁所以咧呢兩個咧，我哋亦要有策略性去睇點樣去應。當然啦，整體嘅醫社嘅合作嗰啲都係好重要，同埋社區個支援有用。咁另外一方面咧，就有兩個領域咧，亦都係比較最近我哋大家都關注好大嘅。第一個咧就係我哋長者嘅精神健康問題。長者精神健康問題裏邊當然包括咗亦都長者抑鬱嘅問題啦。我都記得我哋有一班嘅精神科醫生咧係非常專注呢一個問題，亦都做咗好多關於長者自殺呢方面嘅追蹤，同埋做咗一啲嘅各方面嘅工作咧去支援。咁睇下可唔可以減低呢一個長者自殺率啦。咁另外一個咧就係而家咧仲有3個名喺度，不過我已經早幾日講咗咧，我就會正式採用，除非有專業嘅共識話俾我聽唔係咁樣啦。如果唔係咧，我會正式採用認知上流症呢一個名。咁呢一個亦都係一個咧，從 隨住我哋人口老齡化咧，越嚟越嚴重嘅問題。實際上，我哋每一個人可能都有個經驗，包括我自己在內，喺你嘅家人親人裏面都會有呢個問題嘅存在。咁呢一個病咧，佢特別嘅問題咧，無論個病疾病嘅機理、個病嘅診斷同埋治療咧，都係存在好大問題。而且成個疾病咧，嗰個光譜啊，成個疾病譜咧係好又好輕嘅，淨係比較失能啲，冇記性，冇咁重。有晒所有精神病嗰方面嘅一啲嘅病徵同埋咧就甚至個人嘅基本功能都喪失，都要咁遠需要呢個係好大程度嘅照顧咧，都可以嘅。咁所以點樣應對呢一個問題？點樣解決嗰個及早診斷、及早介入嘅問題？點樣照顧？係點樣有一個模式可以照顧成個疾病好咁多人，佢嘅病人同埋佢家人照顧者嘅需要，點樣支援佢哋咧，都係一個好大問題。最後仲有一塊咧，就係同我哋小朋友或者幼年嘅朋友有關嘅。咁當然呢個亦都唔係一個病，而係一環子嘅問題，包括自閉症啊、寫障礙啊。或者過度嘅敏感呢啲咁嘅問題咧，亦都係一個存在嘅問題。因為呢類嘅問題主要咧就係越嚟越似乎多呢類病，或者多呢類病俾人利用到出嚟。社會上加埋嘅設施喺無論係精神科嘅服務，或者係我哋其他專職治療嘅服務、語言治療或者心理輔導各樣教育嗰方面等等咧，都似乎咧唔係好足夠咧。去照應咁多嘅。咁喺咁嘅情況之下咧，我自己一開始翻工之後咧，我同啲同事傾咧，亦都去大約係睇一睇呢個或者我哋整個係政府以前同埋我哋嘅專業機構做咗啲咩嘢。咁亦都回應翻我哋即係呢度亦都好多朋友喺度咧攞翻呢個。於是乎咧，我哋就喺較早時候咧成立咗一個精神健康嘅檢討委員會。咁啊，精神健康嘅檢討委員會咧，其實都已經開展咗工作。咁啊，裏面咧就好似我頭先講嘅，用嗰幾個範圍咧，係比較針對性咁樣睇嗰啲問題，係可以點樣解決。以我自己嚟睇咧，有啲問題咧比較容易解決嘅。其實咧，開頭我哋成日都講咧，大部分人都以為係資源嘅問題。其實好多時咧，第一個問題未必係資源，即係如果係淨係金錢可以解決嘅問題咧，其實係相對簡單嘅。咁啊，譬如例如咧，我哋話精神科藥物嘅問題啊，如果呢個問題係資源可以解決咧，我哋盡量爭取多啲資源去解決嘅。因為佢個本身唔需要好大嘅組織嘅力量啊。但係其他問題咧，尤其是醫社合作啊呢類嘅問題，或者係唔同存在於我哋唔同嘅專職醫療同埋我哋醫護之間嗰個協調，點樣能夠先俾到一個係好整全嘅服務咧，俾到我哋需要嘅人同埋支持佢哋嘅家人咧，呢個先至係。咁所以喺呢件事上面咧，我哋以即係成人嘅精神健康嘅問題嗰兩個範圍嚟講咧，因為咧都同個治療好有關嘅。咁所以咧，我都係咧以醫管局嘅中央嗰個精神科嘅協調委員會合作啦，就然後咧就係睇下點樣咧，我哋政府可以投入多啲資源咧去支持，做得好啲。譬如話個案經理，我哋可唔可以繼續有足夠嘅人力嘅資源去更多啲，然後令到我哋嘅個案經理嗰個覆蓋率同每一個人嘅承擔嘅嗰個病症或者個案例咧係唔需要咁多啊。呢啲係一個工作方向。而咧，如果係情緒病嘅問題咧，可能咧嗰個答案咧就係話，如果我哋淨係要依賴我哋精神科醫生專家本身咧，好可能咧唔能夠喺短期之內解決呢個問題，就要中途都唔得。咁所以咧呢個答案咧，根據我即係聽翻，即係大家研討翻嚟之後咧，可能咧存在咧係要去授權多啲咧其他 除咗精神科專科醫生以外嘅一啲醫護人員，例如係家庭醫生啊、護理人員啊同埋其他專業嘅人，令到佢哋係可以咧喺個基層護理嗰度咧係能夠幫補多啲呢啲輕症或者係情緒病嘅狀態。呢度當然個過程裏面係需要好多嘅培訓同埋一啲好多嘅授權嘅安排。咁講到嗰兩個頭先我講存在喺長者同埋小朋友嘅問題咧，其實就係一個咧需要去探索一個整全嘅模式。既然係咁咧，所以咧呢兩個問題咧，我哋分別咧成立兩個工作小組，去探索一個模式，而作出一個建議俾翻政府咧係點樣做。咁而大家都留意到，我哋呢一個精神健康嘅檢討委員會雖然係由食物衞生局嘅主導咧，但係咧其實係引入晒政府嘅其他有關嘅政策部同埋部門。所以咧，其實咧，我哋嗰個委員會咧，都係有能力咧，係去協調翻。即係如果我哋呢啲工作小組咧，係做出啲咩建議，甚至啲建議可能咧係涉及到我哋唔同嘅一啲即係部門之間嘅合作嘅問題啦、啲社嘅協調咧，我哋都盡量希望咧，透過呢個機制可以做到。咁所以咧，呢個工作小組咧，就亦都開始工作。整個嘅我哋所謂嘅檢討咧，如果我哋覺得去檢討咧，可能就係一個 exercise， 所以咧佢應該有時間。咁可能我哋即係由開始到1年到，或者階段性會有一啲嘅活動出嚟要做嘢。但係亦都可能喺到嗰個階段未係全部晒出晒，然後可能再分階段再有其他嘅結果。無論如何都應該唔會超過2-3年之內。我哋希望咧有一個整體嘅方向出嚟。然後當然咧存在嘅一個再遠啲嘅問題咧，其實我自己現在嘅階段諗法咧，就係呢一個機制咧係可能咧喺呢個檢討之後咧，會將佢化成為一個 standing 嘅一個 mechanism， 就係至於大家要叫做咩名係另外一件事。但係無論如何咧，如果你話成立一個另外一個機制係脫離咗我局嘅咧，咁我相信咧，我就有個保留啦，因為我自己覺得咧呢件事食物衞生部嘅責任係嘅，咁所以咧都應該由健康嘅角度，應該係由我哋。咁當然咧，社會服務方面嘅教育啊，其他方面咧都好多工作要做。咁但係佢哋都同意咧，喺件事上面喺香港特區政府嘅層次咧，係由我哋嘅局咧係去主導。咁所以個工作咧係去到呢度。咁當然咧，中間嚟講咧，我覺得咧，雖然我哋整個嘅檢討可能都要1年2年或者長啲，但係咧其實中間係有啲咩做得嘅咧，係冇即刻做。譬如話我哋嘅精神科藥物，如果我哋一爭取幾多資源就擠落去，咁就可以做到解決咗呢個。據目前醫管局俾我嘅個資料咧，大概60%到嘅而家。即係我哋可以好自由咁用嗰啲精神科藥物，咁但係呢個可以逐步再做到，亦都有資源啦嘅。咁maybe I should say a few words in English for overseas guests. Very brief. I took up the position of the Secretary for Food and Health in July of 2012, which means up to now it's 1.5 years. And even before I took up the position, I think there are a lot of dedicated healthcare workers related to the field of mental health or organizations have already approached me and have discussions and reflected a lot of opinions about the shortcoming of our current mental health services in Hong Kong. Right after I took up the position, I have reviewed the situation in the hospital authority, and we have delineated the area of mental health work into the adult area of adult psychiatry, which of course comprises of the severe mental illness as well as the various emotional disorders to properly categorize them. And then there are two other specific areas of concern, which is the issue surrounding the elderly persons, because the office with a rapidly aging population. So the area of the elderly and depression and suicide is one area, and of course dementia is also a very imminent problem. The other area, which is a basket of situations affecting our children, would be related to issues like autism, dyslexia, hyperactivity, attention disorder, that sort of thing. So there are roughly 4 areas. Of course, you can never neatly classify the whole spectrum of mental problems. But nevertheless, we have also reviewed the existing problem. For example, in the area of severe mental illness, we will be able to identify the major problem raised, such as the inability of our frontline psychiatrists to freely utilize the newer generation of antipsychotic medications, the issue of the inadequate coverage of the case manager in different districts, and the area of the emotional disorder, it must be a rapid rise in the numbers of patients turning up at our psychiatric specialist clinic. The reason behind could be because of the increasing stress in the society, or because of the work that we have been doing with all the dedicated workers in the field for the past 10 years or so in destigmatization, so that more people would now be willing to come out and receive treatment. And I also reflected my own experience in the
高局長留步亦都睇到高局長係好有承擔好關注精神健康嘅議題咁我哋全力支持咁。
係啦，咁落實推動咧全民嘅精神健康政策，咁會少得我哋嘅康復朋友同埋家屬嘅參與咧。咁我哋請埋我哋嘅康復者代表黃文烈先生，以及家屬代表香港加年家精神健康倡導協會執行委員會委員羅偉星先生上台。
當然仲有我哋香港精神健康議會嘅召集人，同埋我哋嘅顧問陳家乃教授同埋陳仲牛醫生。有請陳教授同埋陳醫生上台，同咁多位嘉賓一齊主持我哋呢個啟動嘅儀式。
咁麻煩工作人員咧就俾幾塊嘅拼圖俾我哋嘅幾位嘅主禮嘉賓。係啦，而家咧應該每位嘉賓手上都有一塊拼圖嘅。咁我哋一齊數1、2、3之後咧，就請大家將嗰塊拼圖拼合咗喺後邊我哋嗰個背幕裏邊，成為一幅完整嘅圖畫，亦都係代表咧今次我哋會議嘅主題，代表各界齊心協力，我哋一齊探索未來。好，請預備，1、2、3，齊心協力探索未來。
好，唔該晒各位嘉賓。請大家首先咧就嚟一個大合照先，去見證我哋一個齊心協力探索未來，成為我哋一個願景。好。
今次咧研討會能夠順利舉行，又點少得我哋一班辛苦嘅活動籌委成員呢？咁請埋我哋今次活動嘅籌委成員，快啲一齊上台，我哋影個大合照。咁亦都希望多位來賓俾啲掌聲鼓勵下我哋啊！
我哋邀請埋衛生署嘅同事都一齊上嚟整個大合照，好嘛？請衛生署嘅同事都一齊嚟，我哋希望我哋有 mental health 之餘，都有我哋真正嘅健康嚇。好，程醫生。
今次真係眾志成城啊！
好多謝晒咁多位嘉賓，亦多謝晒高永明局長同埋咁多位籌委同埋咁多嘅支持嘅同工。今日齊心協力探索未來精神健康政策研討會嘅上午部分正式告一段落啦。即係參加上午活動嘅朋友咧，喺填寫翻我哋嘅活動問卷啦，然之後喺你離開嘅時候，俾我哋接待處嘅同事。喺呢個時候亦都一啲未登記出席今日我哋